Captain Magnius was red in the face from yelling. He stood tall and broad, his short-cut grey hair failing to hide the veins pulsating near his temples. "Sir, decks 7 through 9 are compromised. The hull is holding after the breach. They'll be here on the bridge any moment," the young security officer, Officer Brenson, shouted in some combination of panic and urgency. Magnius tightened his grip on his arm bracings, blades in front of his hand in a curve and extending down the outside of his arms to a point. They were shiny and deadly. He nodded to the team of assault troopers gathered on either side of the bridge entrance. They understood the nod, sprinting one by one in a close combat formation, out the bridge door and down the long hallway, running fast. The security officer panicked. "Sir, what are you doing? We need to stay in a group and organize a defense of the bridge. We have to defend the ship." Magnius looked over at Brenson, not attempting to hide the disgust showing on his face. He considered running the coward through and killing him on the spot, but quickly thought better of it, knowing that he may need every soldier, even the bad ones, to survive this swarm assault. Instead, Magnius pushed the man out of his way and ran after the shock troops down the hall. Near the midway point of the ship, they engaged with the force of the enemy swarm. The enemy called themselves Abraxian and claimed to be the original civilization in the Luminary, thus claiming the rights of all Luminary resources as well as the current civilization illegitimate. There was no negotiating with them. If they were place-hated, they wanted more. If they were challenged, they wanted more. Magnius smashed into the fray, wielding his blades with studied perfection. He moved and spun, slicing into an enemy soldier with each motion. Fast, precise, deadly. He turned the tide in just moments. Several of his shock troops were wounded. Any that could run forward with him to engage the next group of enemy troops did. The wounded would care for themselves. The small group of Machians led by Magnius pushed their way to the breach point. It was bloody hand-to-hand fighting all the way. They picked up other shipmates, some combat troops, some ancillary personnel. If you served on Captain Magnius's boat, you were a fighting soldier first, and an administrator, cook, or whatever else your expertise was, second. The ship's automated defenses finally sealed the outer infiltration point. There was nowhere for the swarm troops to retreat. As Magnius landed the final killing blow on the last Abraxian, he turned to his group of soldiers, letting out a primal war cry and raising his blood-covered bracings into the air. The soldiers emulated the act, the ship corridors filled with the powerful howl of victory. As the war cry faded, Magnius said, "Bring me Officer Brenson." Several assault troops sprinted from their positions back to the bridge. Brenson was dragged and thrown to his knees in front of Magnius. Every person except Brenson was covered in Abraxian blood, thick, grey, and sticky. Many were cut and wounded themselves, mixing their red blood with the grey mess, showing the difficulty they had just been through and the effort they had just put in. Brenson kept his eyes lowered. He knew what was coming. The hallway stank with the smell of carnage. Captain Magnius was still breathing heavy, his chest rising and falling to the rhythm of it. "Officer," Magnius said to Brenson. Magnius's voice was low and terrifying. Brenson was too scared to look up. Magnius nodded to a nearby soldier. The soldier stepped forward and inserted the cutting edge of one of his hand-to-hand weapons into the side of Brenson, up under the ribs. Not enough to be life-threatening, but a deep and distressing wound, nonetheless, designed for maximum agony. Brenson winced with the pain. "Officer," Magnius said again with the exact same inflections. Bleeding, Brenson slowly stood up and went to attention, straightening his back and bringing his arms down to his sides. He stared off at a point on the far wall just above Captain Magnius's head. Magnius did not move, his breathing relaxed. "Officer, what is your crime?" "Lack of initiative, sir," Brenson replied, calming down and accepting his fate. "How do you plead?" one of the shock troops yelled. There was growing excitement in the air. Where Magnius's breathing had relaxed, many others were breathing faster in anticipation. "Guilty, sirs," Brenson replied. Stoic. He would go out as an officer. Something clicked in Magnius. "Officer, I need to know you understand why initiative is important," he said softly, moving closer to Brenson. Brenson started to reply with something. As soon as he inhaled, Magnius moved like lightning, crossing his bracings and decapitating Brenson with a single graceful advance. A shocked expression crossed Brenson's face as his head fell to the floor, bouncing once with a wet thud. Magnius repeated his war cry, only this time it was the word initiative, which rang out through the halls. The other soldiers joined in, with the war cry becoming a chant that echoed through the ship for quite some time. Outload. Continue to the next datagram. YN. N 2 and 1. Chapter 2. Alethea 50,000 years ago. Odessa and Logan sped through the cold, windy air, using their quick flight belts to travel across Alethea. The Guardians were looking for a place that could be fortified and defended. Even in her full combat armor, Odessa was a full head and shoulders shorter than Logan. She used to be about the same height as him, until they attacked the Old Tech facility and freed their clanmates who had been captured by the hunter Gax. Logan's new height was the least of his problems, though. It took almost an entire lunar cycle for his consciousness to come to terms with his biological death and subsequent rebirth as an android. A combat android, to be exact. An outlawed model built for a past era of brutal warfare among the 5 moons. The two flew quickly, but below the speed of sound. A few simple rules were all they needed so far to avoid detection. Their enemy used both old tech and new tech. With old tech, it could monitor sound waves like a sonic boom. With new tech, it monitored the fabric, the communications layer that connected everything in the luminary circle to the ether. Since Logan and Odessa knew this, they avoided supersonic noise and fabric-based communications. If they did these two things, it seemed, they could travel about the planet unharried. Logan pointed to a landmass visible from their high elevation in the stratosphere. It was on the same continent, but much farther in the direction of the lower pole of the planet. They altered course slightly. It would take about a quarter of the existing day to reach the lower landmass and explore it. Odessa connected peer-to-peer to Logan. How is the battery charge holding up? The combat android that Logan had been transferred to, they did not know what else to call it, was in bad shape after the Battle of the Montes, a full lunar cycle ago. The huge explosion of the ship knocked the charge out of most of the cybernetics on the battlefield. The android Logan transferred to was damaged but remained operational. Once returning to their temporary base in the old, abandoned city, Odessa switched out the damaged battery for one that was fresh, never having been used before. They charged it every night out of caution. This excursion would be the first extended period away from the abandoned city and the battery charger. It is holding up fine, still 100%. I believe, given the current energy usage, I could go several Mashi cycles and still be in the upper percentage of power reserves, Logan outloaded in audible speak. His voice sounded robotic, not primitive, but there was no emotional inflection in it, as there would be if a person spoke the phrases instead of a machine. He had been the captain of the Thoric and the Clan Prime. That now seemed like so many cycles ago. Odessa, Logan's sister, took over as Clan Prime after Logan's transformation. The transition was difficult for her, losing her brother and then getting him back along with all the clan. They marshaled a substantial android fighting force to attack a facility in the mountains. The facility was part of the old tech infrastructure on the planet, one of 9 facilities that manufactured ether reels. The old tech was being used by Batorian and Fovians in a nefarious way. Upon landing the Thoric on the planet, Logan and Odessa's clanmates had been kidnapped and held in the old tech facility, prompting the rescue and battle for freedom. They were now dealing with bigger problems, though. "How about your processing speed?" Odessa asked. "This is the first time you have been able to extend your sensor inloads." The processing cores were good for their time, but I do notice limitations. I have to either reduce the external area I scan or the number of recursions in the processing to keep the cores in real time, Logan replied. Odessa thought for a few moments. She was an expert in combat technology. "We have several inoperable Series 8 units from the battle that we salvaged. We could swap out their cores with the ones in your combat android chassis." Logan turned his head to look at her, an unnecessary movement that a normal android would not have made, but something a biological with social awareness knew to do. "I think it is a good idea. However, Let's find a way to add them into the system and not replace the current cause. I am not entirely sure where I am in this thing, so I don't want to start pulling out parts. Odessa let out an ironic laugh. You are right. Of all the problems we have to deal with, I never expected one of them to be which part of the old, outlawed, combat android held my brother's soul. I don't want to yank it out and kill him again. They both smirked, acknowledging a small portion of the current hardship. Logan, it's good to hear you engaging again, Odessa said, meaning it. The combat android was a big machine built for war. Its chassis was strong, reinforced metal that held several compartments for weapons and ammunition. It could switch back and forth between ranged combat and hand-to-hand fighting, having several different configurations for both. Built as more of a tank than a graceful combatant, the combat android was still surprisingly fluid in hand-to-hand, able to use a wide range of different techniques and fighting styles. Combining expert movements with sharp weapons, quick configuration changes, and dense armor made them a force on the battlefield. Logan looked over to Odessa again as they flew, with the wind whipping by and the luminary shining on the large body of blue water they were currently quickly flying over. Let's talk about the truth tellers. We have a lot of work to do to rescue any captives in the other facilities here on the planet, but the truth tellers are going to be our ultimate problem. Truth tellers were the go-betweens for the ruling administrative and deliberative governmental councils and the people that they governed. Truth tellers communicated what the councils decided. They controlled who could speak with a council and communicated the council's actions. The entire political and social structure of society in the Luminary Circle was based on the principle that the truth tellers were good to their name. They could only communicate the truth. Logan and Odessa caught the truth tellers in several out-and-out lies. Lies designed to lure their clan into a deadly ambush and to use them in a most horrible way, as disposable inventory in ethereal production. I have been cross-loading the data, Logan continued. It is an interesting process, by the way. I do not know exactly how to explain it. I am still me, and I can think for myself, but I am also the android, and I can process based upon the code algorithms I have stored. Then I can choose to use the result of the cross-loading or override the solution with my own beliefs. Since I know who I am, I can understand what is going on. I wonder if perhaps this is what X7 meant when he mentioned he had an ongoing internal dialogue. I have to admit, it would be confusing if I did not know the full extent of what I was. Anyway, for the truth tellers, there has been a recursive error I keep getting when I try and cross-load. The error comes down to the definition of the word truth. Since my codebase comes from before the truth tellers existed, I do not have whatever modern functions might be in place to deal with truth as a concept. For me now, the equations can't balance because there is a contradiction. So I'm curious what you think. What is higher up in the hierarchy? Is something the truth because the truth tellers say it, or is there an external context to the concept of truth that is universal, meaning that the truth is what it is independent of what a truth teller says? Odessa thought for a moment as they soared along in the air. Well, Logan, which answer solves for the algorithms you have now without error? Since your code is from before they existed, it might be a better benchmark for us. She was legitimately interested in which way his coding would lean. It was a tough question. She thought she instinctively knew the answer, but it was hard to be sure she was being objective with a lifetime of teachings of a single point of view. Logan referenced his internal datagrams. The only way to solve it now is to make truth an independent variable, meaning that truth exists outside of the truth tellers, and that truth can be measured as a percentage to their statements. Statements with high truth percentages are true. Statements with low truth percentages are false. The primary challenge still remains. What is the mechanism, if it must be independent of the truth tellers, to establish what is true and what is false? Making truth an independent variable is a solution, but it is not an answer. Odessa smiled at Logan. He was definitely still in there, his calm, rational self. But there was a difference also. He had always been able to think through the details, but this was a new level of thought. His thinking was deeper and more organized than before. She asked him, "What is the definition of truth programmed into the combat android? I know they are not meant for academic philosophy, but as programmed fighting machines, they must have some deep logic circuitry in there." Logan would have smiled if he could have. Instead, he sent her a purple header on his next peer-to-peer response. There are several redundant logic boards, extraordinarily complex code routines and codegrams. However, they all depend upon the unit's orders. The programming is extremely specific. The order the unit receives from its direct superior is its truth. All the algorithms branch from that core concept. It makes sense. You don't want a combat android out there in the field trying to figure out if its orders are true. The logical flow is that if it has legitimately received the orders, then they are true. Logan deliberated for a minute on his own, outside of his processing hardware, then said, "I suppose this actually is a definition. I don't know if we can use it, but the combat android, I think, would define truth as a datagram directly received from a trusted authority." Odessa did not like that assumption. "I am afraid if we accept that definition, then a truth teller could never lie, because the fact that it came from them makes it true. It is circular logic." "I agree. I did not mean to suggest I agreed with the definition, just that, as I stated, it would be about how I think the combat android would explain it. And for a combat android, its need for a definition of truth is fairly more restrictive than ours. In thinking about it more, maybe there is another definition a combat android would agree with. I believe that the inloads I receive from my hardware is true. Both the subsystem and I use the inloads as truth in cross-loading and reacting to them." Odessa felt there was something there. "What would happen if you received an order that was in conflict with your primary inloads?" she asked Logan. "Can't happen," he replied, having already tested this scenario. There is a rigid order of hierarchy built into the core decision processing. Let me see if I can summarize it for you. There are 3 directives. First, the android must follow the orders it has received from its verified prime. Second, the android must preserve friendly resources, including itself, to the maximum extent possible, while still adhering to the first directive. Third, if unable to contribute to Directive 1 and while not in conflict with Directive 2, acquire external resources until a contribution is possible. They flew through the air in silence for a bit as Odessa thought about the directives. She was familiar with Android and ethereal programming, but had not come across this matrix before. Finally, she responded, "So Directive 3 pretty much means reload, right?" Logan laughed. "Yes, reloading is a sacred combat android duty. It is also one of our favorite things to do in the entire universe. Just behind shoot and smash." His last statement was, of course, wrapped in purple headers. The morning was over, and the luminary had reached the beginning of midday. Logan and Odessa were in the air, still at an extremely high elevation, so they could see as far as possible. They had been flying over a mountain range that ran an entire side of the lower continent. It had several nice, high, huge plateaus. The landscape looked as though it had not rained there for hundreds of cycles. "This looks like a perfect area," Odessa said to Logan as they slowed their flight to a stop, looking down over the plateau. "It does." Logan opened his scanner up, taking the time to let them process. His scanners, as well as all the androids and ethereals in their group, had been modified to not use the fabric. The fabric was the communications grid that connected the ether to everything. They had discovered earlier that it was being monitored, forcing them to stop using it and change the way their communication technology worked. "I am finding little moisture in the air down there, and the temperatures look good, steady, and well below the freezing point of water," he continued. Odessa was glad to hear the analysis. "What about the ground? Is it stable enough for us to build an underground facility like we have discussed?" "I am seeing massive amounts of silverterium, much more than our original mining site. My scanners cannot calculate a top range. The ground is solid and easy to mine, otherwise stable, and there is a huge supply of silverterium here. There is enough ore down there to make us rich 1,000 times over." One more lie from a truth teller. Logan and Odessa had originally been sent to Alethea to fulfill a mining contract. The truth tellers had told them they were being given a 3-1-4 opportunity. something everyone dreamed about. It implied there was enough ore to set their clan up for life with currency, never needing to seek a contract again if they did not want to. Instead, they had been sent into an ambush, 600 of their clanmates captured, and their ship nearly destroyed. It had been a setup, and now they were discovering it was a very well-orchestrated setup. Nothing about it had been true. They had been manipulated. "Let's go land and take a look," Odessa said, starting her descent to the area with Logan following. They had been able to establish a scanning pattern to identify the other facilities like the one they had just destroyed to rescue their clan. The old tech the facilities were built around carried an identifiable pattern. However, they would need to find a way to scan the planet without giving their position away. Currently, the only way to scan an area was to fly over it, like they were doing now, for the potential new base location. They could be sure that there were no facilities near this area, making it a good location. But they could not simply fly over the entire planet to find the other facilities. The planet was way too large for that approach to work. As they landed, Odessa reached down and picked up a handful of dirt. The ground is perfect for mining, and as a military post, it is very defensible. The weather is perfect too, very much like Maki. But the one food source we have found is not going to grow up here, she said after looking at the dirt, then dropping it back to the ground and wiping her two gloved hands together to get any residue off. Logan looked up to the sky and to the mountain peaks well off in the distance. The plateau was very large and very wide. "We will have to find a place lower in elevation to farm," Logan stated. "That's okay. It might actually be strategic. Separate things a bit. We can create stockpiles, and I'll bet we can figure out how to preserve the vegetables too. If we are smart, it should work fine." They spent midday walking the area and mapping out what they needed to build to make this location a permanent home. If they could find the other facilities, and if those facilities were running the same program as the one they just attacked, there would possibly be as many as 10,000 Makians that would need a home, food, and something to do. A little more than 1,000 were rescued from the first location, 600 from their clan, and about another 600 that had been captured long ago. Logan looked at the ground. The foundation is only a few measures down. It is all solid rock for several fractions after reaching it. As we dig, we can cut the foundation into blocks and use it to build the necessary structures. We have more mining equipment than we can ever use. Every ship we have found had a full complement of whatever was current at the time of their landing. We also have hundreds of Scout-class ships dating back a couple thousand Mushi cycles. Odessa looked over to the same mountain range Logan had been looking at, which was a considerable distance away. "My instincts are to build a large hangar into the side of a mountain," she said, turning back to Logan. "I remember too," Logan returned. "We are Mashians. I guess we are conditioned to think that way. Use what we know from our home world and teachings. It just seems natural. But it's not going to work here, as the mountains are too far away. We could move the new base, but this spot is perfect otherwise. There is plenty of room, and the foundation is solid for a good distance down. The thing to do is to build the hangar underground here with the rest of the facility. They will not be expecting it. They will assume our conditioning is still prime and that we will just do things the normal way." Odessa nodded her head in agreement. "Let's finish laying out the area and then find a place we can build a farm for food production." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning and scouting, then headed back to the old city, arriving just before nightfall. Chapter 3: Old City. Logan and Odessa floated to the ground in the old city. The abandoned city was majestic, built from megalithic stones. The smooth lines of the structures and the sloping angles of the buildings presented a strong confidence in the construction. The whole place had a knowing wisdom to the arrangement. In the entire city, they had found no writing or anything that could be used to identify the original builder. The only markings, here and there, were circles with geometric patterns in them. The circle was the predominant cultural, political, and religious symbol in the Greater Luminary. So, finding circles was no surprise. The geometric patterns looked familiar, but no one had yet been able to place them. Some of the patterns repeated throughout the city, but they could not find a meaningful relationship to the repetition. Some of the Machians were working on figuring out the patterns, but it was more a hobby. Since there was so little to be found, it did not seem important to pursue it full-time. While the city was old, it was not old enough to have been from the first cycle, and not old enough to contain old tech. Old tech would be an easy explanation for why the city had existed. As it stood, currently, there were no teachings about Fovians on Aletheia 10,000 Aletheia cycles ago. The first ones were millions of cycles old. After their demise, the luminary circle fell into a dark age. Each of the 5 moons regressed back to pre-space travel times. The multiple cultures diverged from each other, each taking a unique path. The Fovians were the dominant biologicals in the circle. They numbered more than the other 4 races combined. Eventually, when civilization reached out into the luminary circle again, the moons waged war with each other, competing for system resources. At times, the fighting was intensely brutal, so much so that over the last 100 Machi cycles, all the races of the 5 moons had negotiated and joined the Great Resolution. The resolution was an agreement to turn government administration over to a central body composed of members from all 5 moons, and to agree to link all weapons platforms to the fabric so that central authority could activate, deactivate, and monitor the weapons usage. This was to make sure the current peace agreements were honored. There were still pirates and criminals on the outskirts of the luminary circle. If attacked, local weapons control could be granted. This was all now academic to Logan and Odessa and their clan. After the abduction and battle here on Aletheia, they had disconnected all of their systems from the ether and changed their primary network over from the fabric to peer-to-peer. They were forced to do this early, as the broader technology infrastructure was used against them to find them and try to eliminate them as part of the ambush. After the battle to liberate the captives, and with Logan's death and resurrection, Odessa had rallied to save just over 1,000 fellow Machians who were captives in the underground facility. They had all been brought back here. Most were happy to be back in a societal environment. The old city was large, there was plenty of room for everyone, and an excellent food source existed nearby. The outskirts of the area had been farms. The vegetables once cultivated now grew in the wild and were easy to harvest. As most large cities do, and this one was no different, it had a warehouse district. Odessa started with 5 large buildings, and they had equipment in dozens of structures, recovering materials, weapons, supplies, technology, and other items from the hundreds of abandoned ships that were littered around the destroyed facility and the surrounding area. Many of the ships themselves were salvageable. The ones that could be made operational were flown back to the city and placed under any building still standing, with enough of a roofline to hide or obscure the vessel from scans or direct line of sight. The ones that were too damaged or too old were stripped for parts and materials, leaving just the inner shell as a testament to those who had come before. Odessa waved to Logan as the two walked in separate directions. Odessa was heading to a nearby office building being used as the central command center. Logan headed to the warehouses. As it slowly set, the late afternoon luminary light reflected on his outer plating. His armor showed both its age and recent usage. There were dents, burned areas, gashes where hand-to-hand weapons had impacted, and several signs of hasty repairs. It was time for some real repairs. He had been putting it off, not wanting to change anything until he fully came to terms with the transition. It had been a while, and even though he realized he might never become comfortable with his new reality, he needed to address the state of the android body and maintain it, just as he did with his biological one. He also knew he needed to update the processors or add several modern ones, as he had discussed with Odessa earlier in the day. But one thing at a time. Tonight, it was time to start the process. He had a clear idea of all the upgrades he was interested in. He walked over to a smaller building. There were lights on the inside, taken from the materials salvaged. The rescued Machians were moving along in their recovery. Logan's clan had only been in captivity for about 5 days. A terrifying time, But some of the others they rescued had been in captivity for several cycles. Those who had been there longer needed more time to recover physically and mentally from the ordeal. The survivors took up residence in hundreds of abandoned structures here in the city. Several different districts started to form as the Marqueans settled into their routines. Life would need to return to some level of normalcy. People needed something to do. But not everyone, not just yet. Hundreds had been rescued after the old tech machine had been used on them. This left their bodies alive, but without a soul, their spirits having been ripped out by the machine and transferred to an automaton. The other people, not affected by the machine, had needed something to do right away, and many of them had important skills. One such person was Franklin. He was an old Marquean who had been combat engineering prime on his ship. He was in captivity for what he guessed was a dozen cycles, an exceedingly long time. When he saw the combat androids, he could barely contain his enthusiasm to examine them and to work on them. The combat models were outlawed, as they represented an age of intense, brutal warfare. The ones discovered here in the older ships would be the only models left in existence. Many were destroyed in the prior battle, leaving only about 200 units remaining functional between surviving units and repaired units, sometimes taking 2 or 3 destroyed androids' parts to restore one to full working condition. Franklin had done most of the work, some with Odessa and some with Ethereals as assistants, but mostly by himself. He seemed to prefer his own company to the company of others anyway. Logan knocked on his door. The entryway was open, but knocking was a social convenience that showed respect. Franklin was working at a large work table. The entire building was his work area. It was not a larger building, but it made for a substantial workspace for one person. There were android and ethereal parts everywhere, as well as technology to monitor, diagnose, augment, and repair cybernetic beings. There were also parts and pieces from the new series of ethereal that they had discovered being manufactured on the planet at the facility they had destroyed. These were Series 8 units. A deviation from the bioform, the Series 8 had only an exoskeleton and looked very much like an automaton. The Series 7 and lower-numbered ethereals were created using a human form with human proportions. Earlier, before the rescue, they had captured a Series 8 unit after the Battle of the Thoric. Making sure the Series 8 communication relays were deactivated, they turned it on and discovered it had a unique personality. How that was possible was later answered by the old tech and what was going on in the facility. They also discovered it had a very sophisticated subroutine for speech. This is what Logan was now interested in. After the knock, Franklin looked up. "Hello," he said to Logan, recognizing him. The combat model of combat models. Special, to say the least. "I hope you are here to start your upgrades. We have so much work to do. What do you want to start on tonight?" Franklin had an outgoing and jovial personality when working by himself on androids or technology. When other people were around, he was much more reserved and mumbled a lot of his thoughts out loud. Logan outloaded in audible speak. "I would like to replace my current voice subroutines with the ones from the Series 8 units. However, I would like the voice further modified to match my prior tone and tempo." Franklin glowed. "Of course, son. Come on over to the master's workbench. I will also have to switch out some hardware. Their voice modulations are not software only." He waved one hand to show Logan where to sit in the room. Logan did not move. "Excellent. I was not sure that you would be ready tonight. Let me ask Odessa to come over for the procedure so we can do it now. She has a standing rule that I am not tinkered with unless she is present." Logan opened a peer-to-peer channel to Odessa. She outloaded that she was on her way and not to start until she got there. While waiting, Franklin said, "The voice box replacement is in the same hardware cluster as your auxiliary cores. These Series 8s have ultra-modern processors and memory modules. Would you like me to replace the old cores with the new processors in your array while I am in there?" "I need enhanced processing, yes, but I do not want to replace the existing cores," Logan replied. Franklin knocked on Logan's chest. "There is plenty of room in here if you are willing to give up some of your ammo storage. This is the auxiliary area. We can add the cores here without replacing the current ones." Logan looked down to where Franklin had knocked on his chest. Giving up the extra ammo space is fine. I have many ideas about reconfiguring several of the weapons arrays to accommodate some of the more modern ones from our arsenal. Franklin gave one more knock on the armor and went over to his workbench, gathering the parts of the Series 8 unit he would need for the reconfiguration. Odessa walked in carrying a bowl with cooked vegetables. She had apparently been in the middle of eating when Logan contacted her. Between mouthfuls, she said, "Logan, I am so glad you are ready for some upgrades and repairs." While Franklin was a master robotics engineer, Odessa was well studied in the area and more than competent in her own right when it came to android and ethereal construction and modification. Walking straight over to Franklin's workbench, the two spent a few microcycles discussing exactly what they were going to do. It seemed they agreed to the approach, as there was head nodding and some excitement. Odessa turned to Logan, holding a lot of hardware in her hands. Her bowl now rested on the edge of the workbench. "Logan, if we use the heavy shooter reserve ammunition area, we can fit in the processors from 4 of the Series 8s, plus their entire local stores. That would provide enough auxiliary processor cores and storage to match everything we had on the Thoric ×10, and then some." Logan cross-loaded something. "That seems an exceptional exchange. I can carry additional reserve ammo outside my chassis if I need to, plus I have some other ideas for later." He positioned himself where Franklin had directed. "Let's do it," he said in his flat, robotic voice. X7 stood in one of the other large warehouses. It was the one holding the 200 remaining combat androids. Many of the androids were repaired after the battle. Some showed signs of combat, and some did not. The androids stood in formation, all fully recharged. The last lunar cycle had X7 receiving a stimulating set of revelations. He had learned he was more than just cybernetics. He had a Machian soul. Series 7 ethereals were said to be programming marvels, the story being that they achieved lifelike responses through a recursive programming breakthrough. X7 and the Guardians had discovered that this was not exactly the case. While their programming was exceptional, it was augmented by the usage of old tech. A process of transferring the life energy and spirit of a living Machian into an automaton, making the automaton truly alive. And of course, ripping the essence from the Machian who had originally held it, leaving a living body that was empty of life. X7 was the prime ethereal. He had been combat prime during the battle, and was still reprocessing the battle often for enjoyment. He had done an excellent job until the Montes had exploded. That explosion had decimated the battlefield. The fallout destroyed or deactivated hundreds of the cybernetic androids and ethereals. He was annoyed that Logan had not warned him that could happen. One more demerit. During the attack, X7 had divided the androids and ethereals into attack groups. Logan had given each group a designation: blackbirds, redbirds, and bluebirds. Afterward, while repairing the combat androids, they identified the group and number designation they were given upon reactivation. This excited X7 even more. He loved organization. Now, he divided the combat androids into 4 new groups: green, red, blue, and black. He had each of them paint the color of their group on their right shoulder. It was a small cosmetic change, but it created an impressive feeling of design when viewing the groups standing in formation, like now in the warehouse. X7 walked up and down the ranks, the field general inspecting his troops. The combat androids watched him walking throughout the room. They imprinted X7 as third in their command structure. Odessa was first, Logan second, X7 third, and E7 fourth. E7 was the other Series 7 ethereal in the clan. There were many lower model ethereals, but they were really just more advanced versions of the androids. The Series 7 units had souls, real souls. They were born from a combination of new tech and old tech here on the planet Alethea, in underground facilities run by the warrior race from Baitor. A peer-to-peer connection request came in to X7 from E7. They had made some modifications to the primary communications arrays to enhance both the range and number of peer-to-peer connections each android or ethereal could establish. During the last battle, the enemy had switched tactics mid-combat, abandoning a formation-based coordinated effort with a chaotic melee. It was a solid approach as X7's peer-to-peer could not handle the higher number of individual engagements, forcing him to abandon central command and control near the end of the battle. He authorized the connection. "I'm here, E7. I would like to cross-load your logistics plan for tomorrow so I can formulate an approach for the Machians we need to start moving." E7 outloaded over the peer-to-peer. Odessa had placed X7 as military prime and E7 as civilian prime. Before his recent realizations, X7 would have resented the move. Now, however, he appreciated it. It allowed him to focus all of his cross-loading cycles on combat strategy refinements and military organization. Where the old X7 would have seen this as a demotion, fewer units under his direct influence, he now saw it as a promotion, the ability to excel at a specific discipline. The move they were starting tomorrow would be complicated. They had to establish a new position and get enough Machians to the site to start the work of building their new structures, while at the same time making sure both the new location and the current one here in the city were protected, with the understanding that, protected or not, they also needed to remain undiscovered through the process of the move. X7 sent the logistics plan to her, then returned to inspecting his troops. When he inspected the blue group, there was an empty position in the formation. When X7 saw it, he started yelling and waving his arms, but no one was around to see it, except the combat androids, who did not care. Chapter 4: Logistics. The next day opened with an overcast sky and a strong wind. The luminary was not visible as the morning progressed, its light diffused through layers of snow clouds. The upgrades to Logan's combat android system had gone well. His android voice now sounded like his biological voice. The new processing cores and datagram storage arrays would take some getting used to. They were orders of magnitude faster than his primary cores and storage. He now stood at a large intersection outside in the wind. With him was Odessa, X7, E7, 4 new Guardians from the Machians, rescued from the facility, and Garnery, Logan, and Odessa's uncle, who took over as Digger Prime. The Diggers were the working class of Machi. Many, even most, enjoyed the work and lifestyle. Some, both those capable and those with aspirations, could ascend to Guardian. A Guardian provided protection and leadership to the clan. Each clan decided for itself how many Guardians they needed and could support. Odessa formulated her own version of the test of ascension. Logan helped her with some of the details, but she did most of the work. Odessa was a person of action and generally found paperwork and details trite, preferring to look at the bigger picture and to do something rather than administrate. But she was Clan Prime, the leader of over 1,000 Machians and hundreds of ethereals and androids. She had committed herself to doing the job and all the parts of it as best she could. 2 of the new Guardians were the men who had spurred the initiative and saved Logan. By securing his body and dragging it to the old tech dice, his soul was transferred to the combat android. The older of the 2 was Aaron, the younger Jace. They were brothers and prisoners in the facility for several cycles. Both men were reasonable and understood the deliberative process along with their place in it. However, they also made clear that they wanted revenge on the people that ran the facilities and whatever organization was behind the whole thing. No problems there. They were in good company. The other new Guardians were both females. Katine, who would have been clan successor to Adyamo as Digger Prime, and Kara, who was young for a working digger, the Thoric being her first time off the small moon Mashi. Logan and Odessa mutually agreed that they did not need or want an upper class in their rescued clan. At home on Mashi, the upper class was divided into 3 parts. First, there were council members. This was the bulk of the ruling class and accounted for almost all the higher Machians. A council member was assigned to sit on a decision-making body, often thousands deep. They would debate topics, write legislation, and vote to adopt or reject laws and treaties. They heard trial cases and made decisions of law regarding their area. There were thousands of councils with thousands of members. Then there were the primes, the first council members among equals. They moderated council discussions and decided what items would be heard by the council and what items would not be heard. Finally, there were the truth-tellers. They communicated what the councils had decided. They were also the go-betweens for the rest of Machian society. They controlled who could speak with a council and communicated the council's actions. Odessa, as Clan Prime, did not want any go-between in the way of honest communication. She would hear from the clan and set agendas herself. This was not necessarily a culturally rebellious position. Many clans operated this way when they were in the field. With everyone gathered and the wind calming down, E7 began her report. Today, we will move most of the mining equipment and 100 digger operators to the new permanent location. We will also be moving 7 of the 35 ships we were able to make operational from the 100 we recovered to serve as temporary housing until the new structures are built. We will have E2 units pilot the ships. It is a short run, and they are more than capable. Garneri, as Digger Prime, you will oversee the new location. I will stay here to coordinate the second phase of the effort. Garneri nodded his head in agreement. He had been a Digger Prime for dozens of cycles, then had retired back to machine work. He loved working with the large mining machines and enjoyed the hands-on complexity of a dig. Adjamo, the Digger Prime for the original mining permit, was killed during her captivity. Garneri did not want the responsibilities of Prime, but he was no slouch, and desperate times called for sacrifices. Odessa addressed Garneri. Logan and I walked the new location yesterday. It is good ground with good weather. We updated the schematics, so make sure you review everything before you start. We changed a number of specifications around the underground hangars. Garneri nodded to Odessa. Yes, Odessa, thank you. This is not my first dig. He smiled a friendly smile, gently reminding her of his age and experience. I reviewed everything last night as it came in. I believe I understand the new design strategy. Further, I understand we need to establish a second location for food production, something close enough for easy logistics and defense. Odessa smiled back. The smile held genuine affection and a small apology, all in good spirits. Do you have everything you need? She asked Garneri. Yes. The ethereals who pilot the ships will transition to lookouts. We can use them, or the ships for defense. Otherwise, it will be very comfortable. We have more than enough equipment and supplies, and there is an abundance of room on the ships. They will be more comfortable to live in than our finished quarters. X7 spoke up. Just as a reminder, the peer-to-peer network does not reach between the new location and here in the city. I suggest you always have at least one ship on standby should you be discovered, or some other emergency, so you can send it quickly to get in contact with us should you need to. Garneri nodded to X7. He had already made such plans, but it was reasonable advice. If there is nothing else, Garneri said, looking back to Odessa, then I will be on my way. We have a lot to get done. They all said their goodbyes. The ships were loaded and ready to go. The group walked with Garneri to his ship. Once he was on board, they watched the 7 scout ships rise into the air and depart. They had selected 7 of the older ships, pre-ether. The older ships had more armaments for protection, should they be needed, and with no fabric technology, no mistake could be made in accidentally using them. Odessa turned back to the group. Katine, how are the sick and wounded? Katine was responsible for the medical center they had set up for those injured, either before, during, or after the rescue. Of the 1,000 Makians that had survived, there were just over 200 being cared for in the makeshift facility. Since we do not have any naturopaths, we are doing the best we can, given the situation. E7 has done a terrific job making sure we have the supplies we need. Between rest and food, I would estimate maybe half will fully recover. This was grim news. However, given the situation, it was nowhere near as bad as it could have been. X7, what about our combat readiness? Odessa asked next. This was how she ran things. She would go to each Guardian and ask them a specific question about their area. It made everyone feel like they were part of the team and kept them mentally in the meetings. I have divided the combat androids into 4 groups: black, red, blue, and green. They are fully charged and repaired. Each group is a contingency of 50 units. I selected the 50 count as that makes each group a significant fighting force in and of itself, and collectively there are enough different groups for battle strategy diversity. X7 paused. It did not feel like he was done. What is it, X7? Odessa asked. I am not sure how to broach the subject. X7 said in audible speak, but there is one of the combat androids that has ignored my instructions and who does not show up for formation inspection. Has Franklin looked at it? It could just be a faulty peer-to-peer receptor, Odessa returned. Yes, X7 said. Franklin spends an inordinate amount of time working on this particular combat android. Logan made the connection. X7, are you talking about me? Odessa was caught off guard, and an expression of surprise crossed her face. She started to tell Logan that she was surprised, then thought a bit longer and realized he might be correct. There was quiet for just a moment too long, then X7 spoke. Yes, B-99, he outloaded in audible. B-99 was the designation of the combat android who Logan had transferred into. Odessa allowed a flash of anger to get the better of her. X7, that is Logan. She cut herself off, catching the anger in time and subduing it. No, ma'am, X7 said, turning to face Odessa directly. That is the B-99 unit that is under my command as Combat Prime. You continue to reference both E7 and myself by our ethereal serial numbers. We were brought about by the same process that B-99 went through. We have been in the clan for over 4 major cycles. B-99 has been in the clan for just over a lunar cycle. I am Combat Prime. B-99 has no ancillary designation as a prime. Odessa looked at X7 for a moment. He was not wrong, technically. She was struggling for words to provide a retort to the perspective. Aaron spoke up. X7, do you know whose spirit was used to activate you? It was a good question. Aaron was apparently quick in thought, and he understood the importance of letting the ethereal crossload datagrams, even codegrams, to reach a common conclusion. X7 looked over to Aaron. No, I do not have access to that information. But you acknowledge its importance? Aaron replied. Crossloading for a moment, X7 stood still, then said, Yes, I do not have access to the memories or personality of my spirit donor. B-99 does. I do not find the argument persuasive, though. B-99's position in the clan is not dependent upon my ability to remember something. The two items are not related. B-99 is a combat android, an old, outlawed model. B-99. Odessa snapped and cut X7 off. X7, crossload and store. The combat android in front of you is designated as Logan. Commit. She used the formal programming interface. X7 would have no choice but to accept the inload and crossload per her instructions. It was impossible to read X7's perspective of the conversation and order. Logan moved closer to X7 in case he needed to be restrained again. This turn of events did not bode well for X7's ability to cope with the current situation. In being focused on X7, Logan did not hear the next exchange. Jace, Aaron's younger brother, interrupted. It is possible to query the old tech transfer machine to release the memories of the spirit to the host. Everyone turned to look at him. How can you know that? Odessa asked, trying to calm down. Jace looked a little flushed from the immediate attention. We have seen it done. The controls are quite simple. The yellow crystal transfers the spirit. The red crystal unlocks its memories. The green crystal exorcises the spirit out of the host. There were many sessions where they did this several times in a row. I think they were just practicing, paying no mind to how many of us they murdered along the way. Jace was trying to be helpful, but Odessa was irritated that he had interjected into the conversation with X7. She knew she needed to finish the discussion with X7, or it could lead to problems later. That's interesting, Jace, Odessa said, coming across as very authoritative, but I do not think we want to start dabbling in old tech. She was trying to end this part of the conversation so she could get back to X7's misguided view of Logan. However, X7 spoke quickly, moving his head around Logan, who was standing between him and the rest of the group. We should plan on attempting to seize the next facility we go after and use the old tech to release E7 and my memories. It is entirely likely that I am the eldest guardian in our clan. This could confirm it. Odessa was now visibly irritated. Both of you stop. It came out harder than she intended. We are getting sidetracked. We have a lot to get done before we are discovered. We do not have the resources to stage any type of strategic assault where we allow the old tech to remain functional. Plus, and everyone here knows this, as soon as you start to dabble in old tech, things turn from bad to worse. It will steal your intentions and subvert them. Everyone was slightly taken aback. They had never seen Odessa get this irritated before. X7 did not seem to notice the tone. Ma'am, I must disagree. You told both E7 and myself that we were soulborn into the clan as guardians. You offered us an oath, and we took it. I have observed this clan for many cycles. You have taken greater risks for less of a reward. The opportunity for E7 and I to learn who we are, to get our memories back. What could be a greater reward than that? It was a legitimate question, and X7 made a fair point. Odessa knew that if somehow she needed the old tech to help Logan, she would commit clan resources to it, and she would use the old tech if she could help him. She tried to calm herself down. Katine spoke up. I understand your caution. However, it is not like we are worried X7 will end up being General Magnus's spirit. Finding out who our ethereals are might provide solid information to the scope of what we are dealing with. General Magnus had evolved into a fairy tale told to scare children. He lived during the wars between the moons and was viewed as a ruthless military commander. He led a group that was given the nickname War Machine, as they were just that, perpetually creating conflicts with an amount of cruelty that was unmatched. While most likely not historically accurate, the stories told that the Great Resolution was, at least in part, a reaction to the atrocities he had caused on the battlefield, and after, with any acquired territory. It was viewed as a point of Machian shame, often reinforced by the truth-tellers. Okay, I am no fan of councils and administrative voting, and I will never have an intermediary between me like a truth-teller. However, since X7 and I disagree, and because he is correct that he and E7 are guardians with full vestment in the clan, I am calling for a vote. This is a yes or no, up or down vote. No deliberation and no speeches. The question is, do we attempt to take one of the old tech facilities and preserve the transfer device so we can run the coroutine on X7 and E7 as Jace outlined? She took a very short break then. I vote no, Odessa finished. X7 spoke almost at the same time. I vote yes. No, I have seen what the old tech does. It is bad. Yes, it's dangerous, but they deserve the chance to find out who they are. Jace, yes, I know how to do it. It is not hard. Afterwards, we can destroy it. Kara, we need to focus on rescuing the thousands of people in these facilities. E7 stood silent, and everyone looked at her, waiting. I support X7's standing, yes. Odessa stepped into the middle of the group. Well, there you go. It is a tie, and the Prime breaks ties. Odessa, Logan spoke. There were deep emotional fluctuations in his voice from the new hardware. He sounded like his old self. She spun to look at him. Logan, I assumed you are voting no. Old tech is dangerous. It is. He took a half step forward. Logan was used to being Prime and working through the details. I know that, but old tech saved my life, and X7 saved both of our lives when the Montes exploded. We owe it to him. The warm emotions in his voice became hard. However, X7, I am telling you this right now. We will plan for it and attempt to capture the old tech so we can use it. But it is and will be a secondary objective. Chapter 5. Hold the line. Inload. Resume. War Machine. Alt Magnus General. Auth. Odessa 1 plus 2 and 1. Crossload. Multi-vicissitude. Outload. 14,000 datagrams available. Inload. Select random spec not reviewed. Pre-vicissitude. I plus 1, 2 and 1. Outload. The ship lurched headfirst and then stopped, jarring the bridge crew forward and then back. Smoke filled the bridge, coming in from the front, near where the ship armor was impacted. The large view screen flickered on and off, but always holding the image of the swarm vessels in its center. Captain Magnus was stoical, standing at his command station. Arm missiles, he said with little inflection. If this were a drill, he would have spoken the same way. There was no fear in him. The crew reacted to his composure, themselves refocusing on their jobs, not on the near-fatal calamity. Sir, the forward armor is damaged, but we have restored the forward force shield, the operations officer reported, steady and at the ready. Someone get control of the damn display so it stops flickering, Magnus said, with just a hint of annoyance. Somehow, through what seemed like a sheer force of will, an ensign made a power adjustment and the screen held its image. 4 large old-tech ships hung in space. 2 were to the front of Magnus's gunship, named Reason. A third hung above and to starboard, a fourth lower and to port. The female communications officer made a motion to Magnus. Sir, they are broadcasting a signal. It is telling us to turn around and return to the dominant circle. The message says we must do it now or be destroyed. Magnus snorted, walking over from his command station to the communication station. Navigation, all reverse 1/4, slow and steady, please. He patted the navigator on the shoulder as he walked past them to the communications station. Thalia, Magnus's second in command, gave the captain a quizzical look. Not a challenging look, but one that suggested she and the crew may not understand why Magnus ordered the ship to move in reverse. Magnus sneered, reassuring them in his way. "Just buying us some time, Commander," he said gruffly. He was not used to explaining himself, but he understood that he had a good, loyal crew, and sometimes it was necessary to keep them apprised. He turned his attention to the communications station. "Bring up the signal source," he said, leaning in so he could see the display. "Here, sir." The communications officer pointed to the ship that was higher and to starboard. Magnus scowled. "Coward." He said it for himself, but the crew heard it and scowled too, nodding along with him. If the swarm fleet commander was leading from the rear, it was a sign of weakness. "Tactical," Magnus said, straightening from the communication station and looking over. "They are recharging their primaries, sir. About 30 micros, and they will be ready to fire again." All 4 ships had fired moments ago, unprovoked. Magnus's gunship Reason was lucky to have survived the first volley and would certainly not survive a second. Magnus activated a communications port. "Combat operations, prepare a boarding party. Also, move all combat androids to the external launchers." "Yes, sir," the shock troop prime said from the remote connection. "Boarding party?" Thalia said to Magnus. Magnus smiled at his first officer, then gave the orders after the ready light flashed on his console. "Tactical fire all missiles. CIC, launch the combat androids. Navigation, ramming speed. Target the carrier that the message came from. Full acceleration now, both drives. Do it." Everyone on the bridge braced themselves as the ship lurched forward again, this time under its own power, heading towards smashing into the enemy commander's destroyer at top speed. Outload. Continue to next datagram. YN. N, 2 and 1. Chapter 6. Despondent X7 was miserable. After the meeting, he went back to the warehouse with the 199 combat androids. He marched up and down the ranks, sometimes stepping high, sometimes in pretend consultation with non-existent staff. He gave some units demerits for their banged-up exterior, others medals for their actions during the battle over the facility. A few he chewed out, making them do push-ups. It was a meaningless punishment, but it made X7 feel a little better. There was an empty spot in the blue group formation. X7 made a show of being surprised by it, asking the nearby androids where B99 was, walking back and forth in front of them, waving his arms. Between one of his rants, X7 heard a voice behind him. He snapped around. Logan was standing there. He had a royal purple shoulder marking on his right shoulder. "B99, X7 outloaded inaudible. "You are out of uniform. We do not have a purple group. You are assigned to the blue group. Your spot in the formation is here," he finished, gesturing to the empty formation position. Calmly, Logan said, "X7, we both know that I am not in the blue group and that I am not under the direction of the combat prime. I am the one who recommended that you get the position." X7 was clearly having a processing issue. Logan understood. As a biological, the voice in your head was a balance, and you generally had an override for it. In a cybernetic, after the old tech transfer, it was the other way around. The biological voice was primary and could override your programming. It was an unnatural arrangement, and it called for a lot of self-control. It seemed X7 was struggling with that now, as he started yelling at Logan, "B99, this is your last warning. I will consider you a deserter and hostile if you do not fall into formation now." X7 took a step forward and grabbed Logan's arm, meaning to drag him over and force him into the vacant formation position. X7 was now in a full rage and not letting the cybernetic side communicate at all. Logan used his stabilizers and did not allow the force of X7's pull on his arm to move him. Ethereals could display extreme strength, orders of magnitude higher than a normal biological. Not enough, however, to best one of the outlawed combat androids like Logan. After a second pull from X7, Logan said, "X7, stand down. I am ordering you to come with me now to Chief Engineer Franklin for diagnostics." X7 tried a third time to displace Logan, Only this time battle-level force was used. Logan reached over to remove X7's hand from his arm. He moved quickly, but missed the arm as X7 pulled it away and attempted a leg sweep takedown. The force of the sweep was enough to jar Logan, but not dislodge him from his spot. Logan quickly countered the sweep with one of his own. His goal was different. The move was a feint, and as X7 attempted to swiftly move out of the way, Logan reached around with his opposite hand and grabbed X7 under the armpit, lifting him off the ground. This was a power move, like the move Gax the Hunter had used after disabling Logan's flight belt right before running him through with a spear, forcing the use of the old tech machine to save him by transferring his spirit into the combat android. Similar move or not, it was effective. X7 was at an awkward angle, lifted into the air and facing away from Logan. He was yelling orders and commands, even trying to order the stationary combat androids to attack Logan as a deserter. Logan walked out of the warehouse holding X7 in the air, heading to Franklin's workshop. On the way, he sent a peer-to-peer message to Odessa so she knew what had happened. The lights were always on in the workshop, even now during the day. As Clan Prime, Odessa previously could connect to the fabric to shut down an ether reel. However, she could not use the fabric now as it was monitored, and they had switched all communication to the new, hastily built peer-to-peer network. There was no equivalent peer-to-peer command to deactivate an ethereal or android that she could think of in the moment. An ethereal had a control panel that could be accessed on the front of every unit. It had a key coded to the prime for the ether reel. However, there was no way X7 was going to let anyone gain access to the panel. At the workshop, X7 remained alert and able to offer defensive moves. Even though he was restrained, he was still yelling orders and accusations at Logan. Franklin went over to a storage unit in the corner of the room, digging around for something. Meanwhile, Odessa was attempting to reason with X7 to no avail. Eventually, Franklin pulled out a round object and handed it to Logan's free hand. Activate this and route its outload to the peer-to-peer stream. X7 is inloading from you, combining the two signals. Logan did as asked. Nearly instantly, X7 deactivated. The light left his eyes, and he went limp. Handing the device back to Franklin, Logan asked, "What is that thing?" "It is a development tool. In case when working on codegrams for a unit, you lock it up or get it caught in a loop. It only works over an established peer-to-peer connection. This is actually one of the primary reasons cybernetics are still equipped with peer-to-peer at all," Franklin answered, putting the object back in the box he took it from. Odessa nodded. "I knew about those but had forgotten. I used one when they trained me in cybernetics at the academy." Then, turning her attention to X7, she said, "Logan, what happened?" "It is not entirely apparent to me. I went to go speak with him after our meeting to clear the air. He was in a frenzy, still addressing me as B99 and ordering me into formation. He then became violent. I subdued him and brought him here. That's it. That is the whole story. Not a lot of info." Franklin pointed to an area on his workbench to deposit the deactivated X7. "These units are supposed to be reformatted every 5th Mushi cycle. Maybe this is why. The independence of the spirit and the rigidity of the codegrams over time fragment. We are well into cycle 4 for both X7 and E7, Odessa said. The knowledge of the old tech process may have accelerated the fragmentation in X7. We will have to run some diagnostics on E7 also. It could be that the stability of the unit does better with less volatile personalities. Logan, you are always calm and low-key, so you are coping with it better. Maybe E7's donor was the same way. Maybe X7's donor was a more volatile person." Logan used every bit of his voice inflections. "Odessa, all the more reason to use the old tech and release their memories. I can tell you firsthand, knowing who I am is making all the difference. I can't imagine what this experience would be like if I also had amnesia." "I get it," she said, sounding resolved and understanding of the fact that X7's suggestion was something they must pursue. Changing the subject, Odessa asked, "Franklin, is there anything you can do for X7? Franklin looked at the readout from a machine he had wheeled over. "I do not know. I will run some diagnostics and some tests. I certainly could reset him to the factory defaults. That is the recommended approach, and it has been done to thousands of Series 7 units. But we would lose who X7 has become, which seems unfair if we can avoid it. Chapter 7, Lunar Cycle 2. An Alethea lunar cycle was how long it took for the single moon to orbit the planet. On Alethea, that period was about 25% of a Machi cycle and a 13th of a full Alethea cycle around the luminary. After deactivating X7, the team spent the next lunar cycle working on the plan and executing the move to the new location. The away team, as they had become known, led by Digger Prime Garneri, was well ahead of schedule. The ground they were working in was deep, solid bedrock. It was very stable, and their mining equipment was perfectly designed to excavate it. They were able to move all but the remaining sick Machians and a small work crew. The work crew collected the food from the fields and helped to take care of the people too sick to move. They had also moved another 20 operational ships, leaving 8 Scout-class ships in the old city. Food production began at a new location. However, it would take several more lunar cycles before it started to produce anything. The good news was that the wild crops near the old city were being harvested, and there would be enough food to cover the ramp-up time. With X7 deactivated, Logan had stepped in as Combat Prime. There was not a whole lot for him to do. X7 had organized things expertly and had prepared contingency plans and strategies for every situation either Logan or Odessa could think of. Logan decided to keep roughly the same percentage of combat androids as the populations in either location. They had slowly been migrating to the new permanent base at the same pace as the people were. So right now, there were 150 combat androids at the base and 50 still here in the old city. Franklin worked on X7 for a good amount of time, but neither he nor Odessa could come up with anything they could think of to help him. As Franklin's time freed up, he and Logan worked to completely rebuild his combat android chassis, keeping its original cores in place, but updating and improving nearly everything else. They had improved Logan's peer-to-peer capability using 3 of the new tech arrays from the Series 8s. Logan could now handle 64,000 connections at once, with enough ancillary cores to process each one in real time. X7's peer-to-peer arrays had struggled during the prior battle, trying to handle just over 400 connections. Logan's scanners were improved in the same way, but using exploratory prefabric mining equipment in addition to the hyper-modern targeting equipment found in the Batorian armor. He completely rebuilt his primary weapons systems also. He was now a walking mid-range missile platform with both guided missiles, friend or foe missiles, and Hellfire air-to-surface missiles, good for supporting ground combat. He replaced the need to carry a shooter by integrating a mini repeater embedded into each arm, firing from the wrist. For hand-to-hand, they had worked hard to combine the configurable bracings Odessa found with the existing, already deadly, retractable configuration. They also added a pusher shield to both palms. Finally, he upgraded the flight belt to the newer version the Batorians had used, also incorporating a frequency drive as an option, plus solid propulsion rockets in either leg. This would prevent any scenario where the enemy could disrupt his flight ability, which was the move that Gax had used to initiate Logan's biological death. His exterior was new and shiny, using modern, custom-made components that gave him more deflection angles to take advantage of. Near the end of the lunar cycle, they were finished and turned back to X7. Franklin, Logan, Odessa, and Kara stood in Franklin's workshop with X7 still on the workbench. Kara had started making a habit of hanging around the technology work. It seemed she was fascinated with the equipment Franklin used and the process of diagnosing a problem. She also made it a point to use any excuse she could to be around Logan. It was hard to tell if she was captivated by the upgrades to his infrastructure or with understanding the psychology of his spirit given the transformation. Odessa broke the silent contemplation in the room. We're going to have to turn him back on at some point. I would rather do it here in the old city than at the new base so we know what we are dealing with beforehand. Franklin walked over to the box the sphere was in he could use to reactive X7. He retrieved it and returned to the workbench, looking at Odessa for an order to reactivate. Odessa looked up to Logan. Are you ready in case this does not go well? Logan looked down at her. Yes. His voice was calm and soothing, with an undercurrent of confidence in it. Odessa took a step back, moving Kara back as well, and nodded to Franklin. Franklin handed the object to Logan. Activate him, please. Keep the programming orb with you, in case we need to try and quickly deactivate him again. Logan took the object and inserted it into a leg compartment storage chamber meant to store ammunition. He then tied the device's signal into his peer-to-peer array. Almost immediately, X7 whizzed to life, cross-loading and trying to orientate himself. He calmed down quickly. Hello. I am processing that a full lunar cycle has passed. Why was I deactivated? Why am I constrained on this workbench? It appeared that the cybernetic X7 was currently processing and reacting to the situation. What's the last thing you remember, X7? Odessa asked. X7 paused and looked between Odessa and Logan. I remember the B-99 unit was classified as a deserter and would not take his spot in the blue group formation. I remember B-99 attacked me. Logan, who was already standing close to X7, said, X7, you know that is not true. X7 started yelling, Insubordinate! What I say is truth. You all have spent time and resources enhancing B-99 while I was deactivated. You won't even try and help me get my memories back, but you pamper him. This is intolerable. X7's biological was back in charge. With that, in a quick move, X7 broke the restraint and activated his flight belt at maximum velocity straight up. Logan reached for him, but X7's move was unexpected and sudden, resulting in him shooting free up through the roof and into the air. Logan had to move quickly to shield the others in the room from the falling sections of the destroyed roof. Some of the structure was stone with enough weight to cause injury. What the hell? Odessa sighed and said to no one when everything settled down. He knows the range of our scanners and network. Logan was standing outside, looking up at the sky. Odessa stood looking with him. We should change the encryption keys to our peer-to-peer. I have no idea what X7 might do now, but he seems very unstable. Logan cross-loaded. Done. I have updated the key and used an entirely different algorithm for the datagram. All units here have been updated. I'll send an E2 unit down to the base to update those. Did we ever give X7 the location of the new base? Odessa asked, thinking. No, said E7, suddenly standing there. It startled Odessa. She had not noticed E7 arriving. Odessa watched E7 for a few moments, as if there would be some visual clue to predict if E7 would have the same challenges X7 was having. E7 stared back, seemingly oblivious to the extended observation. He knows there is a new location, of course, but the site you selected was never enloaded into a datagram I sent him. That's great, E7. Thanks, Odessa said. Logan just stood there. While his voice now had bio-like emotions and inflections, his face and exterior did not, so there was no way for Odessa to know what he was thinking. Finally, he said, E7, what is your analysis of X7's condition? He has struggled for quite some time, sir, E7 outloaded inaudible so Odessa could hear. His balance between internal crossloads and the external world was becoming more fragmented. I did not understand its possible manifestations, or I would have mentioned it. How are you feeling? Odessa asked. I am fine, ma'am. Whatever the process, my two halves are in harmony with each other. I do not have internal conflicts or confusion. What do you think X7 might do? E7 cross-loaded for a moment. She had not tried to forecast his actions. From all the data I have, I would say with almost certainty that he will attempt to make his way to a facility with old tech and use the crystal to unlock his memories. Odessa nodded. She had reached the same conclusion. We should move as quickly as we can then, Logan said. We can consider this location compromised. He won't succeed fighting his way into a facility. Not alone. If he tries, he'll be captured or destroyed. His other option will be to negotiate his way in. That's 3 possible scenarios, 2 of which lead to the disclosure of our activities here. Odessa nodded in agreement. E7, go ahead and get the rest of the supplies loaded on the remaining ships. I'll go to the infirmary and start that process. We should be able to have everything taken care of by the end of the day. Logan watched as the remaining ships lifted into the air and flew away. Everyone was loaded, and all the equipment and materials were packed. He stayed behind with a contingent of combat androids. Odessa reasoned that it would be better to know what the enemy might do with X7's information should they get it. If they did send a group to attack the position here, it would be especially useful intelligence to know how many units and of what types were sent. Logan divided the combat androids into 5 squads of 9 units each and deployed the remaining 5 units as lookouts to extend the peer-to-peer connection and provide early warning. Each of the squads was Blue 1 through Blue 5. Each of the independent scouts was Scout 1 through Scout 5. There was nothing else to do but wait. It was not possible to extend the peer-to-peer, even with relays, as far as the new base. It was extremely far away. So instead, to pass the time, Logan went through combat scenarios and tactics, reviewed collected datagrams, and watched the sky for a sign. He would stay the rest of the lunar cycle, 7 days at least, to see if anything happened. One topic of interest in his reviews was X7's combat scenarios and solutions. Logan reasoned that there would be an identifiable philosophy in the instructions that he could possibly find and use if X7 indeed joined with the enemy, or if he got captured and the enemy had access to the same information. The weather improved from windy to calm, and the temperature dropped significantly, which felt good, or would have if Logan were affected by temperature. It was funny how his memories worked. This was now the heart of the cooling season here, about as good as the climate was going to be all cycle long for the bios. A message came in from Scout 3. He transmitted an audio-video datagram that cut off suddenly. The video showed 3 Montes-class ships heading over Scout 3 in the direction of the old city. X7 and a large group of Series 8 ethereals flew in front of the ships. They came from the direction of the rising luminary. That direction had been thoroughly scouted, leaving Logan to wonder how far they had traveled, or if there were an underground facility not in the mountains that was in usage, as well as the mountain-type facilities. The end of the video showed a beam of energy flash from one of the ships, presumably shooting and destroying the scout with little warning. This confirmed that X7 was either captured and reprogrammed, or that he was a turncoat. There was no other way that made any sense for 3 ships to be heading to the old city with him at the front. Logan acted quickly. He recalled the other 4 scouts, redesignating them escorts 1 through 4. They would be his companions in a command formation. He moved the combat android squadrons, hiding them throughout the city, ready to launch a counterattack, assuming the ships would approach from the direction of Scout 3. Logan noticed that he was uneasy. It was a natural emotion, but he was surprised he felt it now. Then he realized this was the most cut off he had ever been. He was completely alone. Yes, he had the combat androids, but they would simply do whatever he told them to do. There was no one he could share ideas with, and no external data source to reference in a bind. Life back home carried an ether connection and constant thought monitoring. When home, he could always ask for help, and it would appear almost instantly. He could cross-load and share data streams at will. Here, now, he could not even send for help or consult with Odessa for a combat strategy. He was still dealing with the psychological impacts of dying and transferring consciousness to a machine, with the additional immediate burden of having to fight 3 ships with a fraction of the force that was nearly destroyed in the earlier battle with the Montes, a single ship of the same class. His thoughts were broken by a peer-to-peer connection request. It was X7. Logan accepted it on a public frequency, which had security safeguards against any inbound hacking attempt or codegram manipulations. X7's voice through the connection sounded calmer than before, like he was working and had inner peace, if that were possible. B-99, this is your last chance to get information. The 3 callous-looking old-tech ships slowed and stopped at the edge of the old city, hovering several hundred measures in the air, but still casting a shadow on the ground in the bright day. They each emitted a low humming sound, the result of their frequency drives. X7 and about 100 Series 8 units were outside the ships hovering in the air at the front of the formation. They were in an extended wall formation, a giant vertical square with units all equally forward and with X7 in the center. Logan and his 4 escorts slowly floated off the ground and into the air from the center of the old city. Logan had one of his pusher shields enabled, extending it in front of himself. Each of his escorts held a shield control in their hand and had it on and in a similar configuration to his. The pusher shield was a mining and digging tool, useful underground to move dirt and rocks and to hold debris back in the event of a cave-in or another calamity. The shield units extended a powerful force field, balanced with an anti-gravity device, making the movement of rocks of great weight easy and able to hold back tons of rocks and gravel when needed. The scene was absurd. Logan and his 4 escorts against 100 ethereals and 3 old-tech ships. The enemy force dominated the landscape. "What have you done?" Logan asked X7. "How could you lead them here?" Almost immediately, all 3 ships fired their beam weapons, the same weapon that had destroyed Scout 3 in the video feed. The push shields held with no problem. Logan immediately sent a message to all his units to activate and use the shields once the fighting started. Since Logan had been studying X7's strategies, he was trying to identify patterns and noticed that the quick surprise attack after monitoring communications was a tactic that had now been used against him several times. Another message came through from X7. "You are going to endanger us all. The old tech is not what you think it is. It is saving us, not hurting us. You are a fool who has put our people in jeopardy and who betrayed me, so this is the price we both must pay." The ships fired another round of their beam weapons. The pusher shields held again with little effort. Logan wanted to reposition his hidden combat androids again after his pattern realization, so they could approach the ships from different angles. But he did not want X7 to catch sight of the movement, so he held off. In X7's battle plans, he had covered a scenario like this one. In X7's response, the middle ship was targeted and breached, causing a large explosion that incapacitated the other 2 ships. Logan was cross-loading ways to feint that scenario to some advantage. "What have you told them?" Logan asked. "Only what was necessary." "Where is E7? X7 returned. "Everyone is gone, X7. Logan sent over the connection. "It is just me here now. I am alone. I waited, thinking you might return." A new voice came through the same peer-to-peer connection. This meant that somehow they were able to integrate into X7's comm arrays. "B99, the voice said. It was a primitive and authoritative voice. Logan recognized it as Gax, the Batorian hunter who murdered his biological form. Logan found himself growing angry. His edginess from earlier had passed, leaving resolve in its place. "Ah, a Batorian, a backwoods people who we Makaians conquered long ago." He knew Batorians had a terrible temper and thought it was worth seeing if he could antagonize Gax. He also knew this conversation would not last forever, but that it might present an opportunity to learn something about what was going on. They still knew so little about the reasons behind any of the activity here on Alethea. "Ha!" Gax seemed to genuinely be laughing. "The ragdoll who now hides in an old rust machine talks tough. I remember shaking your little body and running my spear through it. A brief moment of joy for me." Logan and the 4 combat androids with him stayed silhouetted in the air. The beam weapons from the ships had stopped. They were ineffective and almost certainly consumed energy from the other weapon systems. "How is the leg, Gax?" Logan asked with as many mocking inflections as his hardware could produce. Odessa had severed the bottom portion of Gax's right leg during the prior conflict. "Ha!" Gax laughed again, enjoying himself. The little rust bucket heard a story. "You were already dead by the time your clever clanmate took her lucky swing. I was having so much fun with the spear that I did not see her in time." B99, X7's voice came through the channel again. "This is your last warning." Logan could see he was not going to learn anything. He finished analyzing scenarios and decided that he would use their same tactics against them, piggyback on communication exchange to launch a surprise attack. "X7, I have something I want you and all of your new friends to hear." Logan did not expect X7 to tell him what he was doing, but he decided to bank on X7's pride, which was significant. He would find out in a moment if his guess was right. "Is everyone listening?" Logan asked over the peer-to-peer channel. He noticed the smallest amount of latency in X7's signal, which indicated that he had indeed opened up the channel as wide as he could. Logan quickly activated the programming sphere. It was integrated into his communications array, after Franklin had given it to him. He brought it onto the signal between X7 and himself. Instantly, X7 and the wall of Series 8 automatons began switching off and falling to the ground. Logan sent the programming deactivation code to X7 over the peer-to-peer connection. It echoed out through X7 to the remaining enemy units. There was the smallest noticeable ripple out from the center of the formation as the units deactivated. The ripple was a result of the peer-to-peer message daisy chaining from X7 out to the other ethereals. A quick circle flashed as the subsequent units fell, dormant. They crashed to the ground, smashing into it and each other. Since they had all been in a giant wall formation, stacked one unit on top of the next vertically, they landed in the same way, gravity doing its job on each. Logan hoped that the signal might affect the ships as well, but either the interface was only meant for ethereals, or since the ships operated on old tech, the interface was different enough for the shutdown codegrams not to make it through. In any case, even if there were more ethereals or other combat troops on the ships, shutting down X7 and the Series 8 units with him had greatly improved the odds. Instantly, Logan ordered Blue 1 through 3 to attack, one squad to each ship. Logan held the other two squads in reserve, always trying to keep uncertainty in the enemy concerning his full contingent and combat abilities. Instead of hand cannons, the primary weapons used in the last engagement, the Blue group was armed with an ultra-heavy repeater called a Betty Boom. These were nearly as powerful as the mortars they found in some of the older ships. Betty Booms fired projectiles with a small amount of propellant so they could be aimed and targeted with nearly vertical flight. Mortars were less aimable and were fired with a high arch, letting gravity assist with the delivery. The three ships were above the combat androids who were firing at the undercarriage. The Blue squads accelerated as fast as they could, flashing up from the ground. The Betty Boom ordnance started to impact the ships. They hit with big slow reports, shooting out smoke and shrapnel upon impact. Each combat android held their pusher shield in one hand and fired the Betty Boom with the other, firing 3 rounds at a time, rocking the old-tech ships with each hit. As the last of the Series 8 units that were deactivated hit the ground, the first barrage was over. Smoke from the impact and some internal damage poured out of the bottom of each ship. The ship's frequency drives screeched to full activation, each using all available power to start a vertical climb and begin to spin around to the way they had come. As the combat androids were reloading, Logan launched the 2 reserve squads, Blue 4 and Blue 5, at the center ship. He wanted a chance to issue extended range fire into the rear of the ship, and the angles finally presented themselves. The 2 squads shot off the ground and fired a massive volley at the center ship. Logan ordered the rest of the Blue group squads to focus their reload fire on the center ship as well. There was a sudden massive swishing sound, and hundreds of targeted missiles launched from all 3 ships as they completed their turn, now a good way up into the air. The missiles individually targeted the combat androids, but the pusher shields held with each impact, protecting the units from the concussion. Dozens of rockets were fired at Logan and his small group as well. They met the same fate as the other missiles, detonations against the pusher shield technology. The center ship was smoking from hundreds of impact points. It was moving slightly slower than the other 2 ships, falling away. Logan was using X7's battle plan now that X7 was incapacitated. He needed to trigger an explosion in the middle ship, while the other 2 were still close enough to be impacted by the blast, so he sent the acceleration command to his flight belt and accelerated past the speed of sound, almost from a standstill. There was a huge sonic boom as he raced forward. As quickly as his new processor allowed, he recalibrated his air-to-ground missiles. These held the highest yield in his arsenal. Launchers shot up out of either shoulder as he fired all 6 missiles at once, 3 from each side, squarely aimed at the slow-moving center ship. The missiles shot straight, and their aim was true, impacting the back of the ship and rocking it forward as the ship lurched up, driving the front of the ship down. Before the ship could go into a tumble, it exploded. The explosion was not as devastating as the Montes blast had been, but it was a sufficient concussion detonation to rock the ships on each side. The shrapnel and debris impact quickly followed, and both of them exploded just a few moments later. There were several combat androids within the detonation range of the ships. They were blown out and away from the blast center, but their pusher shields held, and all in all, every combat android that started the battle also finished it. Only Scout 3 had been lost. B-99. It was Gax's voice. He must not have been on any of the ships. Logan realized he might not be close by either. While Logan was restricted to using the peer-to-peer communications, Gax was not. He could easily be communicating through some relay. "You lied, B-99," Gax continued. "You said you were alone. Ha ha ha, the little metal man does not tell the truth." Logan, hoping to learn something strategic from Gax, did not believe he was in any immediate danger, given the local threat had been dealt with. "I am watching your ships burn, Gax. It brings me joy. Oh, and importantly, I always tell the truth. I am here alone. My android friends here that just mop the floor with you. They are all me, each and every one. I feel we know each other," Gax said, his primitive voice a little more serious than before. "I have separated the light from so many Machians. I sense I know each one. Scared little rodents who dig into the ground." While the conversation was going on, Logan sent a command to the combat androids to reload. A courier was used to go to the warehouse and bring fresh ammunition. Logan had replacement air-to-ground missiles brought to him as well. "Gax, I think you and I should have a sit-down, discuss matters, see if we can reach common ground," Logan returned. "Ha ha ha!" Gax laughed again. He truly seemed to enjoy this ridiculous banter. "Yes, an excellent idea. Let us, you and I, sit down and discuss matters. We can be civilized and eat rodent stew." There was a quick pause, then Gax continued. "Well, I can. You do not eat anymore. Ha ha ha! Send me the location of the rest of your rodents, and I can meet you there for our talk." The combat android showed up with Logan's ammunition to reload. "They are all too shy, Gax. I would rather visit you, I think. Your people are not as shy." "I understand, little machine," Gax said. Logan could pick up a few inflections in Gax's voice that he had not heard before. It sounded like Gax was searching for information while he spoke. "I have checked," Gax continued, "so let us meet here." Coordinates inloaded, Logan used them and identified the position as on an island in the middle of the ocean, far away from any continent. It seemed to be a good-sized island with another mountainous region, similar to the area of the original facility. It was located in an unexplored area of the planet. Gax spoke up after the datagram was sent. "Bring your electronic friends. We will have a fun time. Just like you are alone now, I will be alone then. A small party among friends." Chapter 8. Alone. Logan considered sending a combat android to the base where Odessa was to inform her of the battle, X7's betrayal, and Logan's decision to fly to the location Gax had provided, even though it was, by definition, going to be a trap. He thought better of it, though. It was not clear how Gax was still transmitting to Logan over the peer-to-peer connection. He could be close by. It could be by some other relay. Either way, the risk was too high that Gax would be able to monitor or follow a combat unit, and Logan did not want to risk compromising the new location or the people in it. This also meant he could not venture to join the rest of his clan until he resolved the current situation. It would take half the day to fly to the location Gax had transmitted. While the combat android chassis that contained Logan did not need rest or sleep, Logan himself did, or at least he still felt like he did. As a biological, he would sleep each day, which allowed his subconscious to process information and his intellect to rest. As he adapted to his transfer to the combat android, he needed to cycle off less and less, but he still felt like he needed to every couple of days, or he would grow irritable and feel tired. The time during the flight seemed as good as any, so he programmed in a short duration where he could emulate sleep, turning flight control and scanning over to the automation controls. When he woke back up, he found he was over water. He had kept the blue group in the same organizational matrix, 5 squads of 9 units each, 6 squads counting him and his 4 escorts. They flew at several times the speed of sound, low, with their shields activated and their scanners on the horizon. He knew to proceed as though he was being monitored and as if he was still in a live-fire environment, because he was. He still had some time, so he replayed the original battle near the facility over and over, looking for clues he could leverage. While X7 had been running as combat prime for that battle, he made what Logan thought were good decisions at the time. He watched the initial feints and the first wave of androids, then the ship and its ultimate destruction. The level of concussion between the two explosions he witnessed was vastly different. The original Montes exploded violently and massively, putting out both concussive and electromagnetic waves of energy in the discharge. The detonation earlier today of the center ship, which had been hit with much more powerful ordnance, was several orders of magnitude less of a blast. He decided that the original Montes self-destructed, purposely causing the most violent reaction possible. The ships today were beaten and destroyed, but they fought to the end, not self-destructing, but trying to escape. He was not sure what to make of this conclusion, but was sure it was accurate. His analysis prior had determined one other strategy, that of using communications to target him and to launch unexpected attacks. He had emulated that with the shut-off command today. The only other approach change he noticed from the original battle was the change in tactics midway through the conflict. The enemy forces switched from formation-based combat to individual fighting, letting each unit select and target its own combatant. At the time, it was a valid strategy. X7 was attempting to manage the entire battle peer-to-peer, and the Batorian shock troops were individual bios who could make decisions for themselves. The move had temporarily overloaded X7's ability to coordinate things in real time. With Logan's upgraded communications array, he could have dozens of orders of magnitude more connections in real time than X7 could. If he wanted, he could run an entire battle, managing each of his combat androids in real time to any strategy he sought. Formations gave him an advantage against larger ships. He decided that individual control would provide an advantage when facing shock troops, so he would try it in the next engagement. They were flying with the Luminary, their travel extending the daylight by several measures from their perspective. Keeping with his new strategy, and assuming his next foe had a high chance of being shock troops, Logan reorganized his combat androids. Instead of approaching in formation, they spread out into a single, long flowing arc from left to right. It resembled more of a crescent moon, with each unit spread out from the next. He had no way of knowing what he would face, but at a minimum, this would present a different tactic on his part. It would not be something they had seen before, at least not from him. While he had time now, he also worked on reorganizing his core codegrams. As he mentioned to Odessa earlier, the basic logic tree for the combat android programming rested on following the orders of their assigned prime. An order from a prime was true. He was aware that this was a good logic design. However, he also understood that it represented a danger for him personally, as it left him vulnerable to a codegram alteration attack, where his chassis followed the command of someone else that it perceived to be prime. A concerning dilemma. He had been thinking about how to programmatically assign his consciousness as the prime for this unit. There was no programming construct data model available for the person's spirit stuck inside you. He landed on the datagram, localized message, and built a model that identified a localized message as one with no external source. After putting in a few safeguards, so he would not get locked out if he made a mistake, he switched over to the new model and instantly felt better. This changed his core coroutine to be here. The android must follow the orders it has received from localized messages. He left the remaining two logic flows intact. The android must preserve friendly resources, including itself, to the maximum extent possible while still adhering to the first directive, and, if unable to contribute to Directive 1, and while not in conflict with Directive 2, acquire external resources until a contribution is possible. The group of combat androids was flying fast enough to be ahead of the Luminary. They continued to add hours to the daylight. Eventually, they sighted the small landmass. It was very much warmer here, bordering on hot, with the climate becoming tropical, and with a lot of humidity in the air. This was not a problem for the combat androids, but Logan noted that Odessa or the other Machians would not like this region of the planet at all. They would be extremely uncomfortable here. Logan assumed their approach was being monitored, so he did not bother separating his units or trying to devise a complex strategy. He also assumed that since the enemy would have a good amount of time before his arrival, and knew his numbers, that he would be facing an overwhelming force, one capable of easily handling the firepower the combat androids possessed, now displayed openly several times. The only small advantage would be that many of his modifications were still unknown to Gax or whoever was ultimately in charge. However, while his modifications were substantial, they were not magical and would not provide a decisive advantage all by themselves. He also surmised that since he and his units were visible and being tracked, there was no reason not to activate the full array of scanners he possessed. He started scanning as he approached and was within range, using everything he had. The results were surprising. There was a lot of wildlife on the small landmass, animals of many types. He only found one intelligent biological though, and it read as Gax. Logan continued to scan as he approached Gax. He sent signals deep into the ground, scanned widely across the horizon, and used modern fabric scanners to extend the range and complexity of his readings. There was no question. Gax had come alone, just like he said he would. There was no trace of any technology or other people, androids, ethereals, no facilities, nothing. This was a surprise. Logan considered trying to cross-load updates to his profile of Gax, but decided not to waste the cycles, and instead proceeded to approach and land near the large warrior. The remaining combat androids stayed back, positioned by Logan so they could immediately jump to a combat position, but far enough away to show Gax that he was honoring their agreement and that he would approach alone. Gax had his helmet off from his impressive shock troop armaments. The armor was multiple colors and had both ranged and close combat fittings, as well as many angles and shielding attachments. Just like Logan, Gax was a true Hulk built for war. Gax did not send any communications as Logan approached. Maybe he really did want to talk to Logan without any monitoring from either side of this strange conflict. Logan landed and deactivated his push shield. Otherwise, neither would be able to hear the other's voice without a communications connection through the technology. "You are a brave little rust bucket. I must give you that," Gax said as Logan landed and walked over to him. Gax was speaking in a common dialect. This showed intellect and education. A Batorian's mouth was very wide, designed more for biting and eating than talking. The speech came out primitively. Again, this was not a sign of lack of intellect, just evolution. Logan was able to store and analyze all of this data with a fraction using his new extended processors, while still engaging Gax in real time. "I can't smell anything now, Gax. This combat android chassis does not have olfactory sensors, if you can believe it. However, my memory suggests that you smell as bad as you look." "Ha ha ha!" Gax genuinely laughed. "You insult like a child, but you try to be a warrior. It shows spirit. We are alone here, B-99. The others do not know that I'm talking to you. They think I'm preparing for another ambush." Logan stood tall. He would have smiled if he could have. "I assume you are preparing for another ambush, Gax." "Ha ha ha!" Gax laughed, this time a little ironically. "Yes, Rust Bucket, of course I am. They must be told the truth, just like I told you the truth about our meeting here." Logan was not naive enough to relax, but he noted that Gax used the concept of truth in an interesting way. He set a goal to expand that dialogue, if he could, before ending the conversation. He did not want to question Gax's truth, as it may alert Gax to something he was interested in, and that did not feel like a sound strategy. Instead, Logan remained silent and waited for Gax to continue, which he did. "Things are not what they seem, little hero. I know that you believe you are on the side of the righteous, that you believe you are justified in continued attacks against the old tech." Logan was cautious about fully engaging in the conversation, but as far as he could tell, this was a real exchange, and there was information he needed. It was not all one-sided. "I do, Gax. What you are doing here is evil. It cannot be justified. I will put a stop to it." Gax laughed again, the same deep, authentic laugh. "Rust Bucket, I am your savior. I have saved the Luminary for countless cycles. I will continue to do so. Once I am gone, Another will step into my place because I do the thing you Machians will not do. Even the weak Fovians are smart enough to help. We each have our role, decided by others. But make no mistake, it is I who am righteous. I am your protector. It was not that Logan was confused by Gax's statements. It was just that they flew in the face of the truth as Logan knew it, and of the real events Logan witnessed. Gax walked around to a position where he could see out over the ocean. If it were possible to tell, it seemed he was deliberating something, working through something with himself that he felt was important. Logan stood there. He was on full alert, in constant contact with his combat androids, who were still hovering in the air. He was scanning, and they were scanning. There was no new threat, no anomalies, no new environmental changes. If this were a trap set by Gax, the time to play his hand had come and gone several times. Finally, Gax turned around to face Logan. "Okay, spare parts, I will tell you something." Gax stood there looking at Logan. A few moments went by, and Logan finally said, "I'm listening, Gax." Gax was introspective. If he was acting genuinely, then he put great reverence on whatever it was he was about to disclose to Logan. "I will tell you where one of our facilities is." Logan was surprised. "Why would you do that? I will do more." Gax looked Logan in the eye. He was profoundly serious when he said, "The location I give you, I will not guard. I will work it out so that they decide there is little risk, and we move our troopers to protect other facilities. There will be local resistance, but not enough to stop you if you put in a little effort. But I also want to tell you what to look for." Logan was legitimately confused. "Gax, I don't understand." Gax laughed, but this time there was no joy in it, not like before. "I hope your old wires have not finally corroded. This is not the time to need me to turn the winder in your back like a child's toy. You need to listen. When you breach the facility, you will find the old tech machine just like before. When you get to it, use the green crystals to outload the source destination of the energy it sends after a transfer. Record what it tells you, and you will see. You will confirm what I am about to tell you. You will not believe me now or understand, but you will after you see for yourself. Things are not what they seem. A deal was made. We each received a role to play in exchange for peace. The Great Resolution came with a price that you do not understand, one that many do not understand. Your Mashi Council made a bad deal, but they had no choice. We each had no choice." Gax seemed finished talking. He looked at Logan with an almost hopeful expression, if that was possible. Logan took the opportunity. "Gax, how do I know what I find there will be true? How do I know this is not all some elaborate setup for some purpose that I do not yet understand?" Gax maintained his hopeful expression. "Maybe your battery is low, or a circuit fell off your primary board when a breeze hit you. Do you think I would risk meeting you here for some complicated scheme? Here is what I will tell you, then you can decide." Logan was interested in what Gax had to say, and he had to admit that the Baitorian had played everything straight so far. But he could not connect his behaviors to what he had seen and what he knew about him. Logan realized that he was missing some level of intuition that he used to have. Some intuition was based upon physical senses, body chemicals producing phenotypic input. He did not have that now, and for the first time, noticed its absence. "I'm listening," he said again. "Do you know where old tech comes from?" Gax asked. "Yes," Logan responded, still not letting his guard down and still scanning on every frequency that he could. "It comes from the first civilization that was here in the Luminary Circle. Millions of cycles ago, they disappeared. No one knows why or where they went." "That is what they tell the school children," Gax returned. "But it is not the truth. You asked about truth, how you could know it when you see it. I know this answer. Truth is what you believe. If you believe I am bad, then that is true. If El believe that I am your savior, then that is true. If I believe you are a rust bucket with a low battery and crossed wires, that is true." Gax was possibly smiling, trying to tell a joke, but Logan could not decide if it was a joke or an insult. "So then what a truth-teller says is truth." "Ha ha ha!" Gax laughed his genuine laugh. The remark had caught him off guard. "Did you listen to me, Rust Bucket? Are your audio receivers installed backwards or in your rear?" "That is not what I said. Anyone can say anything, including the truth-tellers." It doesn't matter what they say. It matters what you believe. Gax was quiet for a moment. It seemed he wanted this point to sink in so Logan understood it. Logan was still unclear. That's ridiculous. If I claim I am invincible, that does not make me invincible. If I tell you that gravity pulls up instead of down, that does not make it so. Gax showed some frustration, and his temper flared for just a moment. Loose screw in your head, are you this naive? There is a difference between what is said and what is believed. You could say you are invincible, but deep down, no, it is not true. You do not believe it. In order for something to be true, you must believe it is true, not just say it is true. You can say gravity flows up, not down, but you would know that is not real. You would not believe it even though you said it. Do not confuse what is real with what is true. Truth is a concept, real is a thing. However, to further the point, if you believe you are invincible until you do not believe it anymore. If you believed you were unbeatable when we fought, and that was truth, when you felt my spear run through you and your life started to flow away, your belief changed. Truth changed over time. My spear was real. It changed your reality. When your belief changed, what was true changed. That is the problem with truth. It blows in the wind, going this way and that way. In that moment, the world changed around you. Truth changed around you because time changed. You were the same, but truth was different. In the blink of an eye. Like I said, that is the problem with truth. It changes. It makes it so two truths can exist at the same time in contradiction and both be correct, even though neither may be real. I can be both good and bad at the same time. I am good for me and bad for you. Gax chuckled again, making another joke for himself that he thought was funny. Logan was silent, trying to process the information. He believed Gax was trying to offer a reality to him. Something important. He did not know if he struggled to understand because he now had a logic processor and circuitry, or if he would have grappled with this information in any capacity. Gax paused, thinking, wanting to be clear, somehow able to read Logan enough to know that Logan was cross-loading the data. Gax, Logan finally said, now fully committed to the conversation. I am working on these concepts. I do feel there is something important here, but I have to be able to organize these concepts into datagrams. Contradictions result in cross-loading errors. The concept that you can be both good and bad at the same time is continually aborting my crossloads. Gax walked over to the view of the ocean again. Logan could not tell what he was pondering. Eventually, he turned around and spoke slowly. B99, I will talk to you now as if you are a child. Do not be insulted by it. Logan nodded his android head in a biological gesture. B99, answer this question, Gax began. Is the luminary rising at the start of each day here on Alethea true? It was an oddly worded question to Logan, but his cross-loading instantly returned that it was true. So he said, Yes, Gax, it is true that the luminary rises each day here on Alethea. Good, said Gax, his hopeful demeanor returning. And it is true that each day here on Alethea has a fixed length of time? This was straightforward. Yes, Gax, as the planet turns at a constant pace, it is true that each day is the same length. Gax was still serious. So, for you and me, this is true since we are both here on Alethea. For both of us, the luminary is true, and the length of the day is true? Yes, Logan said. Gax gave that disturbing smile. Good, he said again. Now pay close attention to this last question. You have already said that you reached a logical contradiction with the idea of one thing having two truths. Even though it proved what I said, that true and real are not the same. You struggle to understand that I can be both good and bad at the same time. That you can be both good and bad at the same time. Here is the last question. Is it true that today is the same length for both you and I? Logan was going to reply that yes, of course it was, but his programming cross-loaded a contradiction. Then he understood. Since he had flown in the direction of the setting luminary, he was at a different point on the planet and had added measures to his day, from his perspective. You are talking about perspective, Gax. Today will be longer for me if I stay here, but the same for both of us if I return to the old city. It depends upon my perspective and my actions, what I choose to do next. It would be true that both our days are the same length if I choose to return to the old city. It would not be true if we both remain here until tomorrow. Gax slapped his armor, making a startling sound. Does this let your faulty circuits finish cross-loading without smoking up your insides? As it turned out, it did. Logan was surprised. This explanation solved for his codegram contradiction. He and Odessa had discussed this when searching Alethea for a permanent location, but had not considered perspective in their analysis. He realized he had developed the logic model backwards. If Gax was correct, truth was not in the teller, but the believer, because the believer brought perspective. I understand what you are telling me, Gax, but I still do not see how that explains anything. Gax nodded. He seemed relieved that Logan understood. So now I will tell you truth, now that you understand how to hear it. He walked back over to Logan and spoke earnestly. The first cycle was not the first cycle. Their name is a lie. Civilization is much older than even them. They did not go away. They still live on the outer planets. The truth tellers know this. They made a deal with them for power in exchange for selling out everyone else. We are all slaves to it. These first ones feed on life. They feed on our lives. They eat us like animals, devour our energy through the old tech. It is how they live. They have an insatiable thirst for it like we do for the air we breathe. Do not be deceived into thinking otherwise. They are immensely powerful and cruel. You and I are nothing to them. You are not invincible. I am not invincible. Even if we were invincible to each other, they can hurt us both. They are more real than both of us. So, I am telling you, if you destroy the facilities here and stop the production of food for them, they will come and take it themselves. Your act of goodness will be bad. If roused, they will take more food than they need. Their nature is gluttony. They might even try and eat you, a back-wired rust bucket with a low battery and faulty wires, Gax concluded. Logan knew things were being manipulated with the truth-tellers and the councils, with all of society, really. He knew things were not designed fairly. This rings true, Gax, but why provide me a location to a facility if you claim me, freeing my people, is bad? Gax watched Logan carefully. It was the first time that Logan noticed how old Gax looked. There were age lines on his face and around his eyes that suggested he was very advanced in age and had seen a lot in a long lifetime. Gax spoke, some of the primitiveness gone from his speech now. I am telling you because I know you can cause us problems. You might be able to do as you wish and destroy all the facilities. You have proven this. At a minimum, you can disrupt what we are doing. You feel righteous because we are sacrificing Machians, and you still identify as a Machian, even though you are not one anymore. This is their role. Machians are food for the first cycle. Each of the 5 moons and their inhabitants has a role to play. I do agree the Machian role is the worst. But, to answer your question, would you not sacrifice one child to save a family of dozens? If you go to the facility and see what I have said is real, then you will stop. If I do nothing, you will attack a facility anyway, but not discover what I need you to see. They stood in silence for a long time. Enough had been said. Logan needed to decide if he believed Gax, if he would allow his truth to change. Finally, Gax said, I can defeat you, B99, but it will come at a great price. You and your raggedy band of flying wind-up toys can cause enough damage to make it so that what you and I do does not matter. You can impact our deal with the first cycle. You can destroy everything. Another pause, then Gax continued. I am a warrior, but that does not make me a fool. If by telling you what is going on you can accept that truth and understand what really needs to be done, then I will be holding up my part of the bargain as Alethea's protector in the Great Resolution. I will be honoring the deal I made, even though I am doing it differently than agreed. Logan and Gax talked longer. It was a somber conversation. Gax gave Logan the coordinates to a facility in a lower continent and instructions for how to find clues to its location, so there was no doubt concerning its discovery. After a while, they each flew off in separate directions. Logan heading back to the old city, and Gax off to wherever it was he spent his time. Logan reflected on the conversation as he flew into nightfall. Gax had been correct in one element. Today would not be the same anymore. Chapter 9. Fragments. Odessa walked among the burning wreckage just outside the old city. Debris was everywhere. along with the husks of the 3 Montes-class old-tech ships. One ship was obliterated. 2 others were somewhat intact in places and probably had components that could be salvaged. There were similarly ethereal bodies everywhere, smashed and piled on top of each other where they had fallen. Kara walked alongside Odessa. The two were a mismatch. Where Odessa was tall with a warrior build, Kara was shorter and slim, with longer hair and wider eyes. 6 E2 units were with them, spread out and on alert, constantly scanning the environment for any changes. It was a dark, overcast night. Visibility was good in the oily darkness because of all the burning wreckage and fires from the short battle. The ground-level smoke had largely cleared, though it still bellowed from the remains spread out over the landscape. What little wind there was did not stop the smoke as it ascended into the atmosphere, adding to the blockage of starlight. Kara followed Odessa closely as they moved among the metal and fires on the ground. After several measures of this, Kara asked Odessa, "I do not see any of our combat androids in any of the remains. I cannot understand what happened. How could we win such a decisive engagement yet not be here? There is no trace of them anywhere, not even Logan." Odessa looked down at Kara, then looked around at the strewn field, which was spread out in a large pattern. "It's strange, I'll give you that. I wonder what happened." It was not really a question, more a way to stop talking for a while. After walking the entire field, Odessa ordered 2 of the E2 units to provide reconnaissance of the larger surrounding area, instructing them to search to the edge of the peer-to-peer communications distance, but no farther. While that was happening, Odessa walked back over to the piles of broken ethereals. "Kara, stay here and work with the E2 units to start separating these downed ethereals and inventorying the fallen ships for usable salvage. I am going to head back to base to see if Logan or any of the combat androids return there." Kara was notified that Logan and his group of combat androids were in communications range and would be arriving within just a few measures. She was excited to see Logan again, as this would be her first chance to talk to him without anyone else around. The squadron of combat units silently flashed into the area, with Logan at the front of the large formation. As they landed, each unit immediately got to work helping the E2 ethereals organize and inventory what was salvageable on the battlefield. Logan walked over to her. "Hello, Kara. Did Odessa put you in charge of the salvage operations?" Kara looked up at him. "Yes. She flew back to base hoping to get word of your status and location." Logan nodded, and a moment later, one of the E2 units put down what it was carrying and launched quickly into the night sky. "I just dispatched one of the E2 units to provide her a summary of what happened, so she does not worry." Kara nodded. "What did happen? We could not figure out how the battle was won so decisively and where you had gone." Her heart was beating in her throat. She was fascinated by all the advanced combat technology and was excited to be a part of the undertaking. She still could not believe she was able to ascend to Guardian out of the near 1,000 Machians in the rescued group. Logan started walking through the ethereals that the E2 units had organized. X7 led them here. They brought 3 attack ships and 100 of the new Series 8 ethereals. I used the coding device to deactivate them. Then we attacked the center ship and destroyed it. Its concussive blast took out the other 2 ships. He did not want to disclose any more until he could talk to Odessa. He had been recursively cross-loading his conversation with Gax and its implications, and he needed to get her perspective before he could be sure he was not making a mistake. Not a logical mistake, as he was well able to handle those flows, but since he noticed that his intuition had changed with the transition, he wanted to be sure he had the right point of view on things. As Gax had just told him, he needed to make sure to have the right perspective, so he could understand the truth when he came across it. He paused in front of X7's battered exterior. Between the fall from this battle and the repairs after the original battle at the facility, X7's peripherals had been through a lot. Logan reminded himself that it was just earlier today that he confirmed X7's decision. He had been baffled by it earlier in the day. Now, he wanted to make sure he was not making the same bad decision by believing Gax. X7's change of view may be completely justified if what Gax inferred in his explanation was really what was happening. X7 may have been confronted with two bad choices, which, along with his desire to gain access to his memories and his perception that Logan was standing in his way, might have led to a very logical choice. The only way to know would be to reactivate him, which had been miscalculated the last time they reactivated him. So this was yet another decision that Logan did not want to make without consultation with Odessa. He needed some more time to get used to his new situation and to be sure he understood what inloads to prioritize over others in his new form. Kara was still looking at him. It had been silent for longer than he realized. Finally, he said, "What?" while turning his head to look her in the eye. "Where did you go?" He thought for a moment about his conversation with Gax about truth. There was an opportunity to gather some intelligence immediately after the battle. I took it. Logan thought about what Gax said. "You must tell the truth. I need to discuss with Odessa before I know if the opportunity paid off or not." Kara was not completely satisfied with the answer, but was not confident enough to challenge Logan, given he was Combat Prime and this had been a combat operation. Instead, she changed the subject. "How much of this stuff can we salvage?" she asked, genuinely interested in understanding all the aspects of combat technology operations. Logan glanced around the littered field and waved his arm to indicate the entire area. "After the first battle, we recovered over 65% of the high-value components, including our own ethereals and combat androids. In that case, the Montes had exploded with such force that nothing was left from it. Here, I suspect we will be able to reclaim a higher percentage, including some advanced components, between the ships and the Series 8 units." Kara looked at X7 as they stood over his body. "What about X7? Logan looked down at him as well. "Yes, I am sure X7 is salvageable. The question will be under what conditions do we reactivate him, and to what end?" He bent down and reached into X7's inner chassis and removed what looked like a piece of old tech that did not belong there, holding it in his hand so both he and Kara could see it. After a few moments, Kara recognized it. "That's a transponder. But not for the fabric, and not for peer-to-peer. It must be an old tech equivalent." Like all old tech, it had a menacing look to it. Gax had told Logan where to find it, how to deactivate it, and how to reactivate it without giving away his location. "That is exactly what it is," he returned to Kara. "Take this and inventory it like everything else. Do not mess with it, and do not activate it. What did Odessa tell you to do once everything here was organized and inventoried?" She took the small device, having to reach up a little to take it from Logan's outstretched hand. "Odessa told me to leave 2 E2 units here and return to base. Then, based upon what she could discover about your whereabouts, we would send ethereals here to recover the valuable pieces of the inventory." The combat androids sped the salvage up considerably. Logan decided to save time and trips. He desperately wanted to get back to the new base and talk with Odessa, but a little initiative on his part here could save them 3 or 4 days of travel and logistics. "Kara," Logan said, "given what you know, do you believe Odessa would be all right with you, and I using the combat androids to finish the inventory and return with the salvage? We could save several days." A jolt ran up her spine, not from anything important, just the excitement and pride of being a guardian and being part of these leadership conversations. She felt great honor in Logan asking her a question, in him not simply telling her what to do without regard for her viewpoint and experiences. I think she would be fine with it. My impression was that she wanted to be finished here as quickly as possible, which this would facilitate. She was also concerned about your well-being and knowing where you were and if you were okay. Logan would have smiled a reassuring smile at her had he been able. "Good. Take that old tech transponder to her and Franklin. Tell them to be careful with it and not to activate it until I return. Let her know I am okay and that between myself and the combat androids, we will return tomorrow with as much salvage as we can bring and an inventory of what is left. Then we can all decide what to do next." Chapter 10, Planning. There were several surprises in the wreckage as Logan finished organizing the remains. The first was that the 3 Montes-class ships did not have crews. They were being controlled remotely. There were two different things this could mean. The first was that this mysterious enemy did not really support X7 and only sent expendable resources. The second was the opposite, and it meant that there was not the large combat force left on the planet that Logan had feared, so there were not many resources left to send. This was yet another item he wanted to discuss with Odessa. His inclination was that it was the second possibility, adding in Gax taking the time to try and reason with him, instead of just using overwhelming force. In any case, the net of the observation was that the two semi-intact ships did not have any personnel equipment in them that could be salvaged, but they did have old-tech machinery, and both had crystal data storage devices that may be recoverable, which could lead to more intel. Neither ship was operable, so Logan pulled out anything that looked like a communications array or transmitter, stored the recovered Series 8 parts in the ship hulls, and dedicated 10 combat androids each to lift the ship and collectively use their flight belts to move it from the crash sites back to the base. The flight speed was very slow, but everything was relative, and there was no pressing matter that conflicted with a full day's travel time, so that is what they did. Logan flew ahead and reached the new base roughly half a day before the rest of the combat androids and ship parts would arrive. He landed near midday, with the luminary at its peak. It was windy and cold, but the plateau they chose for their new home was otherwise nearly isolated from storm fronts or precipitation. As Logan glided to the ground, he was impressed with the progress that had been made. No one could beat a Machian digger when it came to getting work done. On the surface, many structures were built of stone, in the same general style as the old city. While most of the base was underground, not everyone wanted to live a life without fresh air or being able to see the luminary or night sky. Many wanted to live above ground. For some, the safety of the underground areas was preferred. Above ground, there were houses and buildings, open spaces and meeting areas. Everything was made from stone. More than matching the old city style, it was a clever way of using the rock quarried out from building the underground structures, hiding the construction from casual aerial observation. Under the ground, a massive hangar was under construction. It was large enough even now to hold the many rebuilt Machian ships and the approaching old-tech salvages, as well as the thousands of rescued digging and mining machines. It was a modern facility. They were in no short supply of technology. In addition to the hundreds of old Machian ships they could not repair, but could pull parts from, they had the equipment from the raising of the attacked facility. There was ample lighting and air ventilation in the hangar, and plenty of space for the materials and equipment. Separate from the underground hangar, but attached through a causeway, were the underground living facilities. Organized in much the same way as the above-ground area, there were houses, buildings for work and administration, and meeting areas. With only 1,000 Machians, the current usage of the base was utilitarian, but if thousands more were rescued, the base would be able to transform into a fully functional city in its own right, with enough people to expect recreational and societal elements returning in form. Logan walked into the massive hangar and over to a command and control area near the front of the large underground structure. There were monitors on the walls of the wide room and a central planning station in the middle of the room. Odessa and Kara were there. When Logan entered, they both rose to greet him. Odessa, with a look of relief, awkwardly started to move to embrace him, but then stopped. The combat android form was not designed for hugs. On the displays were peer-to-peer feeds from many of the ethereals and combat androids. Audio, video, and data came in from different areas around the base, where the automatons were deployed as lookouts. Some feeds were from high up in the surrounding mountains, some from inside the above-ground area looking out. Logan spoke first as he neared the center of the room. The salvage should be here near nightfall. I've outloaded the inventory to the central system. There is a lot of old tech we recovered that we need to consult with Franklin about. I disabled and removed anything I thought looked like it could be used for communications or tracking, so we should be safe from that standpoint. Odessa, there is a lot to go over. Some things I would like to go over with you first, Then we can call a larger meeting of the Guardians to discuss. Kara understood the comment. She gave Odessa a hug, waved to Logan, and exited the room, closing the door as she left. The side of the room facing the hangar was transparent glass. They watched as Kara walked away deeper into the structure. Logan turned back to Odessa. I talked face-to-face with Gax for quite a while. He stated it bluntly to get the conversation started. There was no need to delay this part of the discussion. She blinked a few times. Really? How did that happen? He was able to inject himself into the peer-to-peer connection I had with X7 as he and the war party approached the old city. After we defeated X7, which I will get to here in a moment, he sent me coordinates and requested a meeting. I was convinced it would be an ambush, but he said he would meet me alone, and that is exactly what he did. I have a lot I need to go over with you. As I got deeper into his story, I found I was having a hard time processing the events. I still have intuition, but a lot of intuition, it seems, is based upon physical inloads, hormones and nuances. I no longer have access to those, so I found myself unsure at times in how to read some of his statements. Odessa sat down in a chair near the center planning station. She nodded, telling Logan to continue. I can go into more details, but the net result of what he told me is twofold. First, he claims that the first cycle, who created the old tech, are still around, living on the outer planets. Second, that the Cogitate Circle made a deal with them to keep them from destroying our civilization. The deal is something to the effect that they feed them Machian energy, which is a byproduct of the spirit transfer we witnessed. As I understood it, this energy is their food. Machians are the crop. If food keeps coming in, the peace agreement will be honored. If it was stopped, they would come and get it themselves, using their advanced technology, resulting in widespread devastation. Logan felt this was a good time to pause. The information, if true, was shocking. Odessa looked at him for a few moments. Do you believe him? Odessa, I truly don't know. This is what I was talking about. I do not have intuition like I used to. I do not have access to nuances anymore. From a logic standpoint, and from however much of me there is in here, I did believe him. But I am not asserting that. I am concerned by it, actually. She stood and walked over to him, as if somehow getting closer would allow her to diagnose his dilemma. She stood in front of him and placed her hand on his chest plate for a few moments, then leaned back against the center table. Tell me the rest, and then we can figure out what to believe. He gave me the location to a facility, far away in the lower pole, and instructions for how to find it organically to avoid suspicion. I have commands to use from him to get a datagram outload from the old tech transfer machine, which he says will prove he is telling the truth. In Hanta, separately, so you know, the 3 ships we fought near the old city did not have crews, they were controlled remotely. Logan paused again, wanting to see if Odessa made the same logical leap as he did concerning the meaning of the ships being crewless. That's interesting, she said, walking back over to her chair and sitting down. Logan noticed she was fidgety. This was like her. She was much more comfortable with a clear course of action than a deliberative process, putting pieces together to try and infer the meaning of things. She understood strategy once the information was available. She did not like the process of working through the details to find it. Were you able to talk to X7? She asked. Yes, but not in a meaningful way. We had a short discussion before I combined the programming device signal to deactivate him and the other Series 8 units over the peer-to-peer connection. I will tell you that after my discussion with Gax, my anger at X7 went away. At first, I could not understand how he would turn on us. After hearing Gax's descriptions, it could be that X7 thought he was doing the right thing in preventing us from attacking any more facilities. That coupled with his desire to gain access to an old tech machine to retrieve his memories. It is all confusing, Odessa. The last piece, so you know, is that X7 had an old tech transponder embedded in his inner chassis. Gax told me about it. When I returned, I removed it and deactivated it. But Gax gave me instructions for how to use it to safely find the old tech facility. I don't know why it was embedded into X7, or if he even knew it was there. It did explain how Gax was able to inject himself into the peer-to-peer, though. Odessa leaned forward and put her head in her hands, thinking. Logan was silent, watching her, waiting for her to work through the information. He anticipated her reaching the same conclusions he did, ready to continue the conversation. Finally, she looked up at him. There are some elements I don't understand, but it seems to me that our enemy here does not have a force capable of dealing with us. It is the only possibility that explains everything. Logan was thinking about this too. He had identified the same thing, but there was a small difference. I think you are right, but they might not have all the information about us, just like we do not have all the information about them. In every engagement, we have often held units in reserve so we could adapt to the flow of battle. From their viewpoint, it always looks like we have standby units. We also tend to hit them hard and fast, singling out key resources. The point of this strategy is to look more powerful than we are and to keep them confused. We are not there to fight, we are there to win. If we ever engaged where we could not control the flow of battle, or we lost the initiative, we would fare far worse. However, that said, I do agree with you. They are not the force we feared they were. Not right now, anyway. What we encountered at the first facility might have been their main fighting force. I do believe, in the end, we could have the run of the planet if we want it. Gax implied that there would be local resistance at the facility he gave us the location of. I assume this will be true for each of the facilities. I suspect there is no larger reserve for them to marshal, not yet. They could have sent for reinforcements from off-world, and could be trying to buy time for them to arrive, willing to sacrifice one facility to save the other 7. Odessa stood again and walked over to the back of the room to look at a few of the monitors, still fidgety. Logan, I watched Gax kill you. He was vicious. He reveled in the carnage and the killing. He took actual pleasure when driving fear into the mass of captured people. You asked me for my intuition, my instincts. They are to do the opposite of whatever he asks of us. If he wants us to turn left, we should turn right. If he wants us to go slow, we should go fast. She turned around to look at him and walked back in his direction. He may actually have told you the truth, or some version of it when you talked, but that does not mean that his motives are true. I have not had a chance to tell you, but Franklin found a communication anomaly that he is sure is coming from the underground old tech facilities. He can use it with little risk to locate, within a few measures, each of the remaining locations. I think using Franklin's method is a lot safer than activating this old tech device found in X7 or doing anything that Gax suggested. Logan remained stationary. I am glad to hear your insights. I knew I was missing something. Intellectually, I knew that trusting Gax was dangerous. I just did not have the other inloads to validate. Logically, he made complete sense, but logic is not the entire story. We still have the problem concerning the first ones. If what he told us is true, shutting down the facilities will bring about a larger conflict and more hardship for the entire luminary. I think we will need to consult with the broader group, Odessa said, but there is no way I'm going to let any system that uses us as a food source survive. If what Gax told you about the first cycle and the old tech is true, then we must destroy it and deal with the fallout. If what he told you is a lie or half-truth, then it leads to the same thing. We must destroy the old tech and free our people. Odessa and Logan were in the command and control center. Odessa was seated at the large center planning table, along with all of the Guardians, including Aaron, Jace, Kara, and E7, plus Garneri, who was Digger Prime, and Franklin, who had become Tech Prime. This group comprised the entire small leadership team for the clan. Between Logan and Odessa, everyone was briefed on Logan's recent experiences. The group was now deep into the discussion concerning what actions they should take. For me, Aaron, the older of the two brothers, was saying, "The only question is, how can we attack all the facilities at the same time and quickly?" His brother Jace nodded in agreement. Both having spent significant time in captivity, their desire for revenge grew a little each day after their rescue. Katine also nodded in the affirmative. If I understood everything correctly, we have two main assumptions. The first is that what you defeated at the first facility was likely their primary fighting force outside of local guards. And second, that we believe they must be trying to buy time for reinforcements from off-world to arrive. And I guess a third assumption is that Gax was speaking the truth about the first cycle. That by rescuing everyone from the facilities and shutting them down, even temporarily, we may be the spark that ignites a much larger conflict. So, there is a price to acting, even if we ultimately have no choice, and an even higher price for inaction. It was summed up well. Everyone was generally on the same page when it came to what needed to be done. Odessa was happy about this and knew it would not always be the case. She worried, though, that they needed to fully understand the implications of starting a luminary-wide conflict with the first cycle. "It seems straightforward is the best option," she said, standing up from her chair and walking back a few measures so she had a view of everyone around the table and Logan, who was standing to the side. "If this starts something larger, we are not equipped to deal with it. Further, we have no political influence with the Mashi Council or the Cogitate Circle. We are making a decision that impacts not just us here on Alethea, but everyone in the 5 moons, Machians and everyone else, all the other races." "We're not going to be food," Aaron said firmly. "I am in no way suggesting we do anything but what has been discussed," Odessa said in a calming voice. She was gaining an understanding of how to manage herself as Clan Prime. "We are all in agreement. I want to make sure that we each understand the gravity of our choice. This choice could end up reshaping the entire luminary." Aaron said in a supportive way, "I don't think we have a choice here, Odessa. We already knew what we had to do, and now we know more about the who and the why." Everyone in the room, including Odessa, nodded in agreement. "So, the decision comes down to how we do it," Odessa continued. "We do have some resources and capabilities. We just have to decide how to use them. Logan and I understand crime squad tactics. That is our primary training. This assault needs more of a military approach. We need to be more direct and not allow the enemy to even consider options, only allow them to react to what we do. In the absence of X7, I have been studying General Magnus and his war machine, how he orchestrated battles during our earlier conflicts with the other moons." Before she could continue, Kara raised a question. "Where did you get the information? I have searched for it myself, and it has all been scrubbed, except for some basic information and the basic schoolchild lines about how he made mistakes and prolonged the war." Odessa looked at her. "I can show you how to access the datagrams in the older mock ships we have salvaged. Many of them are from before the datagram purge, before the truth-tellers changed history to suit themselves. Once we have a moment, we actually should build a new storage array and pull in the data from the older ships. It is information that we do not have access to in the ether, but we can tackle that project later. For now, what I learned is that he adjusted his battle strategy widely depending upon the situation. He always seemed to be able to exploit a weakness in the opponent, and he always seemed able to adapt quickly during battle. He was ruthless. He conducted loyalty purges in his officer corps, eliminating political rivals in the ranks. He was unkind to civilians, and he did not take prisoners. But he won battles, and we have access to the information and can learn from it. Let me play one datagram from the old archives I found about Magnus. It may help us in the here and now." Odessa walked back over to a control panel, and suddenly a video readout appeared on several of the displays so that everyone could see it. The audio was patched through also. An older-looking General Magnus was wearing his full military dress uniform. He stood tall, looking both impressive and intimidating in it. He was surrounded by other military personnel, including Commander Thalia, Magnus's second of many years. They all stood outside, in a council arena. Above them, on the edge of an overlook, sat hundreds of Machians. This was a peace council session, and Magnus had been summoned to testify. "General," a tall and thin male council member said, presumably the council prime. His voice echoed out from his high perch. He sounded arrogant when he spoke. "As you know, the war is over." The council member looked around as though he were the one responsible for victory and ending the conflict. He was not. Truth-tellers lined the opposite side of the arena, recording what was happening and preparing their explanations for the other Machian classes. "We must now move to the business of peace," the councilman finished. "Sir, Magnus spoke formally and loudly. "Reactivate the ships under my command. This conflict is not over if the Abraxian are left intact. The resolution you have reached with them is an ill-fated debacle. We must never be subjugated to the control of others. Return my fleet, and I will bring the peace you desire." Many of the council members shook their heads and made faces of disagreement and noises rumbling with arguments against Magnus's statement. One of the many doing so stood up to condemn Magnus. "General, we will not be privy to your disinformation and lies." Cheers and calls of encouragement rang out among the other council members. "You started this conflict when you attacked their peaceful ships as captain of the Reason. We have heard from the family of Officer Brenson how you misled our troops and sent them into harm's way while you hid on the command bridge, refusing to engage the enemy yourself, even when the command ship of the Armada was nearly captured." Magnus stood looking up at the man while he spoke. It was all lies. Magnus had committed his life and soul to defend the Five Moons and deal with the menace the swarm represented. The council members knew the truth. This was all political theatre. The original speaker, the Council Prime, took up speaking for the other member. "General, you know that your stories of old tech and life-eating monsters are just that, stories, fiction best left unspoken and unheard. We, here," he waved his arm to indicate the entire council arena, "deal with facts and real science, not ancient mysticism and scare tactics." Something flashed in the council area. A portal opened near the arena center. The Council Prime shouted a command, and hundreds of ethereals rushed into the upper chamber and escorted the truth-tellers out of the room. A few of the council members panicked. They stood and started to work their way out of the session. Most remained seated, seemingly expecting the portal and the dozens of swarm-attack troops that rushed out from it. The running council members were shot down by the swarm troops as they emerged from the portal. Only members, up and running, were targeted. General Magnus and his group of officers reacted quickly and fought hard. But they did not have any weapons and were not in their armor. So in the end, they were subdued. Magnus was forced to his knees in front of what looked like the swarm leader. The Machi Council Prime spoke to the Swarm Prime while bowing his head. "We have delivered our end of the agreement, Your Excellency." As the Swarm Prime turned to say something, Magnus swept his left leg out from his kneeling position, bringing it under the Swarm Prime and forcing the large thing to the ground. In the same movement, Magnus spun and grabbed the shooter out from one of the swarm guards near him. He instantly started firing the weapon, killing several swarm troops and shooting the Swarm Prime in the neck a number of times, enough to loosen its head so Magnus could start to try and pry it off. The thing screamed, at first a threatening scream, then a scream of personal terror as it realized its dilemma and felt its own mortality for the first time under the strength of Magnus's attack. The other officers with Magnus wasted no time, using similar motions to free themselves and disarm and then kill the swarm guards holding them. The scene quickly digressed into a bloody mess. Magnus continued to pull and twist the Swarm Prime's head. Eventually the screaming faded into a wet gurgle, then silence. Magnus finally levered the head loose and quickly threw it at the Machi Council Prime, yelling, "Weaklings! How can you subjugate yourselves? You are supposed to be our leaders." Clearing out the remaining swarm troops, Magnus and his officers formed a defensive circle, Magnus talking quickly to them and then all nodding in agreement. After the short conversation, they each stripped the swarm troopers of ammunition, and all of them formed up and leaped one by one into the still open portal. As the final officer went in and only Magnus remained, he looked up to the shaken council assembly. "We fight and sacrifice where you are scared and weak. After I finish this war for good, I will return for you." With that, he leaped into the portal, which closed behind him after a few more moments. The room was silent as everyone now stared, in shock, at the blank video monitor. Finally, Kara spoke. "That is not in any of the historical datagrams. We were taught as children that General Magnus was the aggressor and that he caused much of the destruction the war brought. That had he been more level-headed, a lot of hardship could have been avoided. But this datagram proves otherwise. It also proves that the war was among the 5 moons, but with the first cycle. What did he call them? Abraxian? Odessa put her hand on Kara's shoulder in the same fashion she had observed General Magnius doing in some of the historical datagrams. The real history seems to validate everything we have just learned. The Abraxians are at the heart of conflict here in the Luminary. They run the old tech and are farming us as a crop, and the history we have been taught is wrong, a lie designed to pacify and mislead us. There was another long silence. Then she continued, Logan, I have been categorizing and organizing the historical datagrams. You can access them and cross-load them. There are many lessons and war tactics to observe if you want to. Some of it is quite brutal, and Magnius has questionable morals when it comes to military leadership. But he was the most successful military commander in our history as far as I can tell, and he seems to have excelled at killing the Abraxians. Logan said to her, Thank you, Odessa. I am accessing it now. I will cross-load and adopt his strategies as necessary while holding to our own ethical standards, of course. Everyone in the room was still processing all the information that had been presented. The understanding of their home had now been distorted, and their faces showed it. Odessa looked at everyone in the room, knowing she needed to guide them and keep a sense of purpose to go forward. Franklin, can you give us all a listing of the fighting capabilities you have been working to put into place? Franklin nodded and stood up, walked over to controls for one of the large displays that everyone could see, and touched a knob near it. The display lit up with an inventory list. First, the good news. We have retrofitted 25 of our scout ships with improved armaments and shielding. I have adapted the pusher shields to project from the ships, and we have added chemical propulsion projectile rocket capability. Each ship also has added beam weapon fittings fore and aft. He indicated the locations on an image of the ship that appeared on the screen right when he went to reference it. Both these upgrades should give us improved initiative within the atmosphere, making our scouts easily capable of fighting 2-to-1 with the ships of theirs we have observed. Outside the atmosphere, not so much. The pusher shields won't function without strong gravity, and the chemical propellant needs an atmosphere to fire. The bad news, as you already know, is that we do not have enough people to pilot more than 2 of these ships at any one time. If we use X4 as a ship prime, 1 more, so 3. Franklin sat down. Odessa walked over to where he had been standing. So, our first challenge is combat staffing. We have 40 E2 units that can supplement the crews across the 3 ships. Then looking over to Logan, she said, We have 200 combat androids for auxiliary support and facility infiltration. They can do the hand-to-hand fighting. Logan nodded that he agreed. If everything is as we surmise, we should be able to take the facilities with no losses. Odessa nodded back. Good. Now for tactics. Normally we would consult with X7, who was adept at planning military maneuvers. Without him, Logan, I will defer to you. Logan nodded again. All nods were the same given his chassis. Speaking of X7, I would like to take him with me and you also, E7, to the final facility and have the 3 of us restore your memories before we destroy the machine. Everyone turned to look at E7, who had been quiet up until now. Thank you, sir, but for myself, I believe that will not be necessary. Odessa quickly answered. E7, are you sure? This may be our only chance. Turning to look directly at Odessa, E7 responded with little emotion. Yes, ma'am, I am sure. I am quite content in my current role and with my current situation. I have learned a lot, and honestly, I have plenty of good memories now of my time with the clan. Whatever, or whomever I was before the transfer, accessing those memories will not help me now. I do not need them. Worst case, I fear, would be they cause some conflict in my current programming. Everyone in the room was silent for a few moments, then Kara said, What about X7? He seemed to have a pretty different outlook on things. Logan answered, The plan remains. We will take X7 with us, and once the fighting is over, at the final facility we breach, I will take him to the old tech machine and activate him and follow Gax's instructions for both downloading the datagrams and then allowing X7 to unlock his memories from before the transfer. That seemed to settle everything, except exactly how they would go about the attacks. Odessa made a motion to suggest the meeting was over. Okay, Terrific. Logan and I will put together the battle plan. Please go back and start to prepare. I would assume we carry it out within the next 2 days. There is one more thing, Aaron said. Everyone stopped their movements to leave the room and looked at him. He had a look of concern on his face. The people that are victims of the machine, do we plan on bringing back others that have had their spirit removed? It was a fair question. Great effort had been spent to house and care for the soulless survivors, no one really knowing what the ethical position should be. Kara answered, I assumed we would. We might find a way to reverse the process. Right, Odessa? Kara gave Odessa a pleading look as a way of asking her to help, already stacking the decision to an outcome. Odessa was slightly annoyed that she had been brought into the conversation in this way, but she let the feeling pass. This was a difficult enough topic. Well, we should discuss this. Everyone sat back down at the table, except Logan, who remained where he had been standing. Aaron voiced his concern. For the people we currently have, their bodies are in surprisingly good health, but that blank, soulless stare can become unnerving. We have set up a special room for them and are caring for them. After a while, they do seem to be able to understand extremely basic instructions. What is interesting is that the first thing they relearn is how to eat for themselves. Then they learn where we place the food, and they start to anticipate mealtime. We can show them where their individual bed is, and they seem to know to return to it. It's been some time now, and another interesting thing is that at first they would eat whatever we offered them. Then they started to grow disinterested in the plant-based food we have been farming, so we have had to develop some animal-based protein food sources. If we bring more people back like them, it will put a strain on the medical area we have built, and on the alternative food source, assuming they all follow the same pattern and eventually need animal-based food instead of plant-based food. No one said anything. This was one of the first ethical dilemmas they had faced as a group. It was difficult to know what the right thing to do was. Was it more humane to keep these soulless Machians alive and feed them? Or would it be murder to not care for them, or worse, to leave them behind or even kill the bodies? It looked like Odessa was struggling with the morals and logistics of the situation too. She seemed to be taking her time and working through something, so Kara took the opportunity, again, to speak first. I think we have to keep saving them. What if we do not, and then discover a way to reverse the process? We would be killing hundreds of Machians. There was really no way to disagree, and Odessa did not have a better answer, just growing concerns about the long-term logistics. She let another, stronger wave of annoyance pass. I agree, at least for now, that we need to save everyone, and then we can figure out how to manage the situation once the conflict is resolved. No one disagreed, but the topic did make an already somber situation seem harder and more difficult. With that, everyone got up and worked their way out of the room. Kara held back, and once everyone but Odessa and Logan were gone, she asked, "Would it be all right if I stayed and listened to the planning? All of this is new to me, and I want to learn as much as I can, when I can." The question was addressed to both Odessa and Logan. Odessa spoke first. "It's fine with me, Kara. I am impressed with how much you have picked up in a truly short period of time. Logan, are you okay with it?" "Yes. We could include the whole group, Odessa, if you want to," Logan said. "I know." She looked over to him, aware that Kara was still there and was listening intently. "I'm not ready to start making war planning a deliberative or administrative event. That said, Kara has demonstrated more than just curiosity, and it is smart to have an extra set of eyes and ears." Turning to Kara directly, she said, "Kara, I will ask you to listen as we work through the plan. At times, I may ask you for your input or your opinion. Please offer it honestly, even if you disagree. I will ask, however, that at least for now, you do not interject yourself unless I specifically ask you to. Deal?" Kara nodded quickly. "Deal. I am very excited to be a part of this, and I understand what you are looking for from me." They had to call Franklin back briefly to help them interpret the readings from his passive scanner. They found the 8 facilities, locations based upon the information they had. The facilities were spread out all over the planet. They seemed to be close to rudimentary mining resources, avoiding areas with extremely high deposits of valuable materials. They speculated some of the reason for this, but abandoned the idea as currently unimportant. Eventually, Franklin finished and returned to preparations with the ships he had been working on. Kara considered the location information important, but kept it to herself. Logan had not moved since entering the room. It was an oddity he noticed about himself. As a bio, Odessa tended to move about the room, sit down, stand up, point at things. Logan had been the same way, but now in his new form, he would have to specifically initiate those movements, and to do that, he would need to develop some reason for them. It seemed to him just as efficient to remain stationary than go through the calculation of movements, avoiding damage to anything in the room, assessing its emotional impact, and then planning the series of movements, and watching to inload and then cross-load any additional reactions. From his stationary position, he said, "Odessa, I have an idea for a battle plan." It has not changed after analyzing the datagrams Franklin has provided. Would you like me to propose the plan, or would you like to work through ideas of your own first? Odessa stood up and walked over to a display with blinking images signifying each of the facility locations on the planet. I don't see a perfect way to do this. If we try and attack each facility at the same time, we would be spread very thinly. If we stagger our attacks across the facilities, the later ones will be alerted and will be hardened further to whatever degree they are capable. She looked from the display over to Logan. I think it is safe to assume that they are already alerted to our presence and our intent to attack, rescue, and destroy each location, Logan returned. We do not have any time to spare. I can only imagine they have turned production up, which means they are killing more Machians every moment of every day. Odessa looked serious. I know, this is a terrible situation. What do you suggest then? Logan walked over to the large display. This was the first time he had decided to move. He wanted his suggestion to carry weight. It felt awkward to him to walk over. Once there, he pointed to a pattern of the facilities, from the closest one to them on a path across the planet. I believe we should attack each facility in succession. Starting here, he pointed, and then moving to here, here, and so on. I see us using the same general strategy they used on us. At each location, I will attack with the combat androids. Odessa, you ferry one ship in after everything is clear, and we begin the interior assault. Land the ship, lower the ramp, and we will lead the survivors out and onto the ship. Set the facility to detonate, and then destroy it once you are clear. You return here and land the ship. You and your crew switch to a new ship and head to the next location. This gives everyone time to unload the prior ship without any combat timeline considerations. We do this for each facility. For the last one, bring X7 with you. Once you are loaded and have departed, I will take him to the old tech, download the information Gax told me about, and then follow the instructions for restoring his memories. I will have to reactivate him, obviously. Once that is finished, I will detonate the final facility and return here with X7. Odessa nodded along. Once Logan finished, she turned to Kara. This will mean we will have possibly upwards of 10,000 refugees. We only have about a day, not just planning for them, but before we start receiving them. Chapter 11 Assault. The only component of the plan that changed was to start their assault with a facility different from the closest one to their base. While the base location would not remain secret in the long run, and may not be a secret now, the observation was that there was no need to be careless by attacking directly from here, and that starting at a different facility could provide a slight element of surprise. Logan lifted off the ground with the full contingent of combat androids, organized into 4 large groups: red, blue, green, and yellow. He was becoming more nimble and graceful as he slowly worked to integrate biocentric motions into his movements. Where the other combat androids simply stopped ground movement and activated their flight belts, Logan more gracefully transitioned. He walked forward and lifted off the ground in mid-stride. It was a small thing and a simple maneuver, but it was one element of many that was starting to differentiate him from the other androids. Logan and each unit were in full combat mode. Each had active push shielding, now embedded into their chassis and extending forward, and a hand cannon in each hand. Along with that, they had Betty booms and ordnance in reserve on their back, with hand-to-hand bracings activated on each arm. They flew under the speed of sound, but this precaution was only going to be taken before the first assault. The belief was that after the initial assault, speed would be more important than stealth. Odessa was in a ship and would leave and wait at the edge of the peer-to-peer communication range until given the signal to approach the facility. Other ships were prepped and ready to go per their plan. They also had 2 ships fully crewed and active over the base. With all the combat androids away, this allowed some level of defense should it be needed. Several E2 units deployed to extend the peer-to-peer range. The signal could not be relayed across the entire planet, but it could be significantly extended, so they had constant contact at the first several engagements. It was the beginning of night, just a few cycles into the darkness as the day ended. Their first facility assault had been at the beginning of the day. This next one was at the end, hopefully, another small advantage in surprise. If everything timed out right, they would roll from facility to facility as darkness fell at the location, in time with the rotation of the planet. Each facility was high up in the mountains. Logan knew to scan for secondary connections like the hangars they had encountered in their first facility engagement. He also planned for at least a Montes-class ship, Batorian shock troops deployed from a ground location, and the possibility of Fovian guards in substantial numbers at each location. Logan was running his full scanner array, as were all the combat androids. There was no point in missing a key piece of information. If their assumptions were correct, it would not matter if the enemy was alerted. If they were wrong, it would be important to know that as soon as possible. As they approached the mountainous area, Logan identified the ground access point of the facility and 2 hangars up on the ridgeline, remarkably like the first facility they attacked in both design and geography. It may be that this configuration would prove to be standard. He assigned 1 hangar location to his red group and 1 to his blue group. The orders were simple: neutralize and capture. That left him green and yellow groups for the main assault. Unlike last time, when they did not have any information on the enemy, this assault would be quick and to the point. No flying around trying to draw units out, no waiting around to see what moves might be made. They were all close enough, so Logan gave the order to accelerate to maximum speed. Booming sonic noise cones instantly rang out as the 200 combat androids accelerated to nearly 6 times the speed of sound. Logan targeted the ground entrance and timed his deceleration so that he had enough momentum to crash through the opening and into the entryway on the ground. He was using the same Combat Information Center, CIC codegrams that X7 used in the first assault. It was an unmodified version of their original ship system from the Thoric. With it, he monitored in real time the 2 simultaneous assaults above him into each of the 2 hangar positions. He ran the CIC system on a subarray of his new processors. As he crashed into the entryway, the force of his impact smashed through the building and blew the 6 Fovian guards back and against the rear wall. The power of the impact killed them instantly. This was an advantage to being a cybernetic machine when fighting bios, and Logan was incrementally learning how to use his differences against bio opponents. While the assault and capture orders were the plan for the hangars, he and his remaining teams had to infiltrate the facility quickly enough to reach the captives before harm could be brought against them, assuming there were captives at each facility. Logan positioned the yellow group on the ground in the entryway and outside the main area. Their orders were to guard and defend. He needed to make sure he maintained control of the facility exit and that a landing area was secured for the rescue ship. The ground orders for Logan and the remaining green group were also simple: smash and grab. Use maximum force to enter and traverse the station. Gain quick control of the refugees and move them out and onto the rescue ship. No time in the plan was allocated to conversations or explanations. Those could happen after rescue. Once the extraction was underway, Logan would place detonation charges throughout and trigger them when everyone was out and the location was clear. As he raced into the main corridor, he received a communication from his blue group. They had control of the hangar. There were no ships, but there was a lot of new tech that had value. Logan opened a peer-to-peer connection to Odessa on her ship at the edge of the range. "We are in." The ship hangar was empty, but instead of a ship, it is stocked with a lot of new tech, valuable items we can use. Odessa responded immediately. "Let's update our plan. We should salvage each of the ship hangars. This may be one of our only chances to acquire new tech this easily." Logan found himself nodding his head, which he knew was wasted movement. "Let's use a second ship to bring back the new tech. I will rig the final detonation and send you the code so you can trigger it." "Sounds good," Odessa said. "I am going to hand the prisoner rescue over to Kara with the second ship. I will be more comfortable running the salvage and triggering the detonations. We can't hold you up at each stop, so this seems like an optimal alternative." The Green Group reported that they had control of the second hangar, meeting minimal resistance. They reported seeing several Thoric-class ships in the distance from their vantage point. The Thoric was the original ship Logan and Odessa piloted to the planet. It was a typical Machian scout ship. They had found dozens, into the hundreds, in the areas around their initial landing spot, all abandoned when the Machians on board had been captured or killed, going back hundreds of cycles. "Odessa," Logan said after he cross-loaded the report, "there are dozens of abandoned scout ships here also, just like before. We should get the E2s up here and start a salvage operation as quickly as we can." Odessa agreed and relayed the order back to base. Their strategy of attacking a facility close enough to be able to relay the peer-to-peer communications signal paid off. Logan ended the conversation and continued his rush into the facility. He had some sense of its layout and knew generally where the old tech machine would be. As he raced forward, he met light resistance, a few Fovian guards here and there. He used his pusher shield to move them out of his way and disable them as he raced forward, using his strength to push them into a wall or a bulkhead with bone-crushing force. He could have used the gravity balancer on the devices, but that would have taken longer for the same effect. Every several measures within sightlines, a combat android positioned itself in the hallways. The goal was to maintain control of the corridors and create a channel they could use to move the captives, upon rescue, out to the awaiting ship. Logan sprinted deep inside the facility until he finally reached the room with the old tech. The machine was present, but there was no one in the room. The machine was a complex blend of what looked like stone technology, connected by massive amounts of cords and connectors. It gave off a faint hum. There were two raised daises, and between them, a control console with several colored crystals. He dispatched combat androids left and right, knowing where the controls were to the captive areas. He moved to the machine itself and began placing detonation charges. These charges were originally meant for mining operations, but they were just as effective whether blowing holes in the ground or blowing up old-tech machinery. He received word that several hundred prisoners were present in numerous holding rooms, with an adjacent entrance to the old-tech area. So far, everything was going according to plan. Following the best possible scenario, Logan finished mounting the explosives and moved to exit the facility, falling in line with the hundreds of Mahians being moved along the hallways to the exit. The mixture of people was about the same as they expected. The Batorians tended to use the younger and healthier people first in their experiments, but it was not an exclusive process, and Logan observed there was still good age diversity in this group. As he exited the facility, he saw the glowing lights of the rescue ship. Stepping to the side so as to not obstruct the flow of people, Logan turned and looked up to the mountain hangars. There, he saw the glowing lights of Odessa's ship hovering near the entrance to the large and high mountain structure. He could make out the loading of materials from the hangar onto the ship. Logan opened a peer-to-peer connection to Odessa. "The facility is secure. I will send over the detonation codes you can use when ready. We are heading to the next location." "Copy," was all Odessa returned, obviously busy loading the new tech and working hard to stay on their tight schedule. The next several facility assaults went about the same way. Logan and his combat androids smashing into the entrance. capturing the overlook hangars, and timing the extraction of the prisoners with the arrival of the rescue ship. They faced sporadic, poorly organized resistance. While the Fovian guards in the later facilities were clearly ready and alerted to the pending assault, they simply did not have the numbers or the heavy weapons needed to repel the invaders. As the successes started to add up through the second-to-last facility, they rescued close to 15,000 live Machians and another 5,000 bodies of victims of the old tech machines. People whose souls had been removed by the old tech process, but whose bodies were still alive. On the brighter side, the recovery of new tech and abandoned scout ships, not to mention the numbers of recovered combat androids, was much higher than expected. The final facility was the one that Gax had given Logan directions to find. As Odessa said, she wanted to do the opposite of what Gax proposed. If he wanted them to attack this facility first, they would do it last. Logan thought about what would happen after the assault. Should it be a success, he would take X7 to the old tech machine and use the crystals to unlock his memories for him. Then he would use the green crystal to outload the datagram Gax had said would provide proof concerning the larger situation with the first cycle. They started scanning for abandoned ships prior to assaulting the facility to gauge how many possible survivors they might find. A third ship was necessary at the later facilities, as the number of prisoners was too high for a single scout ship, and they did not want to risk multiple trips or leaving the facility operational in between transports. The first indication that the final assault would be different was the number of abandoned ships visible to the physical scanners as they approached. There were no derelict ships. Logan opened a connection. Odessa? I'm here, Logan. We're falling behind with the salvage. I am not finding any vacated scout ships. He continued to scan while he transmitted. My assumption is that the trap is set here at this facility. It is a logical assumption in its own way. This is where Gax tried to direct us to attack first. He may have marshaled his remaining shock troops here in the hopes of a single engagement. Odessa offered an idea. Do you want me to order in more support? We have recovered hundreds of combat units, maybe more. It is a little chaotic right now. Logan quickly cross-loaded scenarios. No, any units you just recovered need days of retrofits. We can't risk an ether connection, and we don't have time to refit enough units for it to make any difference. My logic cross-loading also continues to conclude that the chances of any prisoners here to rescue are going to be low, approaching zero. We found more people at the other facilities than we expected. If this is the trap, and I think it is, there will be no benefits here. Nothing to salvage and no one to save. Good luck, Logan. I'll return to base and notify everyone of the situation. We will start to activate and organize the combat units for a defense should one be necessary. We were also off on our food estimates, given the higher number of refugees. I'll get to work on that also. There is a lot to do. Notify me when you are ready, and I'll bring X7. With that, she signed off. Logan suspected there had been minor inflections in her voice and nuances in their conversation that he had missed. When everything was finished, he needed to work more with Franklin in designing new codegrams that could inload more details to him about his bio-interactions. He gave the order to rearrange his combat android formation to the crescent moon from the flying walls. He reasoned that this gave him more opportunity to improvise should he meet unexpected resistance. As the group zoomed towards the lower pole, the luminary became visible just on the horizon. The lower pole was tilted and received light the entire day, given Alethia's slow wobble. It grew colder as they approached, even colder than a Machian would prefer. Snow fell in the twilight. It covered everything. Without his scanners, Logan would not have been able to tell visually where the sea ended and the solid land began. Using those same scanners, he spotted airborne platforms in the distance. They were approaching them quickly. He ordered the group to slow to a stop and sent 5 scouts forward to investigate before he and the larger cohort were within range. As the scouts approached, a wave emanated from the platforms. It was a magnetic wave like the one that had affected his flight belt the first time he fought Gax. It disabled the scouts' flight belts in the same way. The scouts instantly began a slow arching fall to the ground, carried only by momentum. However, unlike last time, the combat androids had several modes of propulsion. They quickly switched to their frequency belts and recovered from the fall. Logan considered sending a missile at either platform. His cross-loading quickly returned the second programming rule: to conserve friendly resources as much as possible. He would have smiled if he could have, on reflection, that it was a good codegram. Instead of firing missiles since they were in limited supply, he ordered the scouts to latch onto the platforms and disable them by pulling parts off and smashing their infrastructure until they were inoperable. The scouts flashed to the platforms and began beating on the armor and ripping the plating off. Even from his remote distance, Logan could see sparks shooting out and pieces falling to the ground. It only took a few microcycles for each platform to be disabled. He gave the command to all units to switch over to the frequency belts. These old tech belts offered controlled flight just like the new tech belts did, but using a different technology. The frequency belts used sound to generate a wave that pushed against gravity. The belts gave off a low hum and could only offer flight up to the speed of sound, not faster like the magnetic flight belts the new tech system used. The group resumed forward at the top speed of the frequency belts. The belt's hum grew louder with the effort. Logan positioned several scout teams out in front of the main group and to each flank. They encountered several more floating platforms. Each was taken out the same way, quickly through physical attack, without wasting any ordnance. Suddenly the sky erupted in concussive explosions. Logan was hit directly, but his push shield held. However, the blow was jarring. Almost every combat android was hit. Most of their shields held, just a few faced multiple explosions at once, a force that overloaded the push shields. Those units took physical damage, some falling from the sky disabled. A second barrage hit, same as the first. Logan gave the command to switch back to the magnetic flight belts and to accelerate to near maximum velocity. The frequency belts did not offer enough speed or maneuverability to avoid the incoming attacks. Sonic booms rang out alongside the noise of the explosions, now tracking to the rear of the flying combat android formation. They were moving too fast for the enemy targeting system to keep up. A scout reported sighting the facility. It was the same design as all the others. However, it was guarded by a larger ship. The ship did not match any registry or type in the android's databases. It did generally match the profile of an old-tech frigate. A frigate was the next larger combat-oriented ship up from the common scout class, like the Montes or Thoric. Logan instantly gave the attack order. There would be no advantage to any delay. He slightly modified his battle plan to account for the larger class of ships and reminded each combat android to keep a high priority on inload scans for signs of a self-destruct command. The Thoric used that to end their prior battle to great effect. Should they see the signs of a self-destruct, this time, every unit had orders to navigate away at maximum speed to try and avoid the blast radius. Missiles and flak filled the sky. The frigate fired an impressive barrage of hellfire while bringing its forward guns to bear on Logan's formation. 100 combat androids, 50 from either flank of the red and blue groups, accelerated even faster, targeting the frigate. Their speed helped avoid the incoming fire, and the missiles could not track or course correct in time with the accelerations, as the androids shot forward in their charge. Logan and the remaining units were not as lucky. Several more combat androids fell as their push shields buckled when hit with the incoming volley. To counter this, Logan and the remaining units also accelerated, targeting the base entrance, which was squarely below the hovering frigate. The red and blue groups smashed into the frigate, letting their push shields absorb the impact and redirect it to the hull of the ship through the gravity filters. The red group spread out on the top of the ship and began to target any external weapons arrays, missile launchers, and forward fire guns. They beat, smashed, and bent anything of value, attempting to disable it as efficiently as possible. The blue group organized quickly on one broadside of the frigate. They formed a single-file line from the front of the ship to the back at its midpoint. Collectively, they used the force of their magnetic flight belts to push up on the ship at the same time, rotating it with the goal of turning it over. The maneuver took some time, the ship slowing lifting as its stabilizers fired with a screeching wail, the frequency technology trying to keep the ship stable. In the end, the frequency drive was no match for the 50 magnetic belts and the strength of the combat androids. The Red Group continued to pound away, ripping and pulling everything off the top side of the ship that they could. They made no attempt to board the ship or seize control of it. Logan did not want any units on the inside of the ship, should it initiate a self-destruct sequence. As the ship tumbled over, the Red Group flew off the top like a group of angry hornets. After the ship rolled, the Red Group took up position opposite of the Blue Group, collectively holding the ship in place and not allowing it to correct its rotation. If the ship had a crew, they would not be able to reach common controls. Frequency-based technology did not offer any additional gravity dampening. It was designed for in-atmosphere and in-gravity operations. The ship stopped firing its flak cannons. The Red and Blue groups jointly began to move the ship up higher into the sky, keeping it upside down in orientation. A dozen combat androids moved off the line and to the rear of the ship. They began disabling the frequency drives, pulling out components and infrastructure until the drive died away and the ship became quiet. They slowly ascended the frigate into the air, the ship now a ramshackle, only airborne, because the combat androids were lifting it. Escape pods tried to fire from the top and sides of the ship, but their ejection paths were bent and blocked. The sounds of the pods firing and then immediately hitting the outer edge of the ship, blocked from an exit, rang out in a short, doomed chorus. The combat androids moved the ship from over the base, directing it away to a valley nearby. Once over the valley, they released the craft from very high up. The ship slowly fell, picking up speed until it smashed into the ground. Several interior explosions fired. Dirt and rock kicked up into the air. A second round of concussions rang out from inside the ship, and then it suddenly exploded in a massive blast. Fire and smoke burst out of the craft and into the air, along with a massive noise. The aerial battle was won. The combat androids controlled the sky over the facility. Logan burst into the facility ground entryway. It was the same as all the other facilities, the same layout, the same ineffective security checkpoints. This time, though, he did not have to position combat androids outside the facility or worry about posting units in the hallways. Instead, the full force of green and yellow squads was unleashed inside the underground passageways. Again, the orders were simple: seek and destroy, hunt and kill. There were fewer Fovian guards in the facility, nothing more than a skeleton crew at best. Logan raced through the corridors, using his push shield to smash the few guards he encountered. It was a grisly death, being crushed against a wall or bulkhead, but it was a quick and efficient battlefield technique. Finally, Logan burst into the old tech room. It was empty, but the machine was on. Just as he suspected, there were no prisoners here. They had been used up or moved to the other facilities and already rescued. There was no sign of Gax or any Batorians, just the few remaining Fovian guards. The defense here had been largely automated, but not completely. The frigate ship had been staffed, most likely with Fovians. Logan checked his peer-to-peer queues. He was up to date with communications. The green and yellow groups finished in the underground. Every area had been explored. Red and blue secured the area outside, including the two hangars. The facility was secured, and all threats were eliminated. Logan opened a channel to Odessa. "The facility is under our control. Let's do what we came to do." The reply was quick: "We are on our way." Odessa's voice was confident and commanding. While he waited, Logan walked over to the raised dices and the central control pedestal. He scanned it. It was a remarkably simple configuration for a machine that performed such a complicated process. There were a dozen small, colored crystals around the end of the pedestal. In the center were 3 empty sockets. Near the bottom was a large, clear crystal. Logan had seen the large crystal light up the last time he saw the old tech machine in use. If a single crystal were moved into one of the center sockets, the large crystal would glow with the same color. If multiple crystals were inserted into more than one of the sockets, the crystal would take on the blended color. With a dozen small crystals and 3 sockets, hundreds of combinations could be created, each one presumably instructing the old tech to perform a different function. He saw the crystal he would use to restore X7's memories, and the green crystal he would then use to download the data Gax spoke to him about. Without additional knowledge, the machine was too dangerous to simply experiment with and randomly start inserting different crystal combinations into its control panel. "Logan, we're at the entrance with X7. Logan's peer-to-peer queue chirped the message from Odessa. Within a few measures, Odessa, Kara, and Franklin led in a small group of E2 units who were carrying X7. Franklin had a large pack with him, presumably full of diagnostic and programming equipment. So they would not make the same mistake again in reactivating X7 without more controls in place. The machine seemed to hum with excitement as the deactivated X7 was brought nearer. The E2 units put X7 down near the base of the machine, and Franklin got to work setting up his equipment. While waiting, Logan asked Odessa, "How are the refugees back at base doing?" Odessa shook her head negatively. "It is tough going. Some are fine, many are sick, others are struggling with severe mental and physical trauma. Remember, these people don't know us and were in captivity a lot longer than the few days our clan was. They are struggling with the situation and even with us as their new guardians. They also are confused about their status here and why the Machi Council did not sponsor their rescue." Logan nodded. He was developing an automated coroutine to handle interpersonal communication cues, like nodding, moving about the room when talking, gesturing with his hands. The small things that a bio does to reinforce their communications. Odessa continued talking while they waited. "What about Gax? If he wasn't here, then there is some other location they are using." Logan cross-loaded. Again, the information collected through Franklin's passive signal scanners. "I agree, but wherever it is not on this planet unless Franklin's scanning algorithm is incomplete. I have gone over the data many times. These 8 bases, plus the first one, so 9 in total, are the extent of any presence by the 5 moons here on Alethea." Franklin could hear the conversation and interjected. "The passive scanner is accurate," he said without changing his focus from setting up his equipment. Odessa turned to Franklin. "We may need to start focusing on near-orbit scanning. Gax is somewhere close enough to direct his defenses in real time. If not here on the planet, then close by above it for sure." Franklin nodded, too busy to engage at the moment. Chapter 12, General Magnius. Magnius opened his eyes for the first time in over 100 years. It took him a few moments to understand what he was seeing. Standing before him were what looked like Machian military, but not exactly. There was a tall female in combat armor, a shorter female who was attractive and young, some kind of techno-support nerd fiddling with knobs on a large board, and a retrofitted combat android with massive impact scarring, a purple shoulder insignia, and blood all over it. He did not recognize any of them. The room he was in seemed very large. He could not see the edges of it through the shadows. He tried to turn his head, but nothing happened. He tried to move his arms, and nothing happened. Instinctually he said, "I can't move." The techno-support nerd looked up from his board. "X7, we have disabled all of your motion coroutines. We can't have another incident like last time." The 2 females looked at the nerd with reverences and nodded along with him. The large combat android did the same thing, which was exceptionally strange. Magnius made a note to have the thing rebooted. It did not occur to Magnius that the geek had been talking to him, so he repeated himself, regaining some of his faculties, his voice more his own this time. "I can't move." The 3 Machians and the combat android all swung their heads to look at him, a look of surprise on their faces. Magnius reasoned that they must be the lower-ranking members of some rescue team and that they were humbled to be in his presence. The combat android spoke to him in a human voice. "X7, why did you use that voice emulation?" Magnius tried again to lift his arm. He was already tired of these fools, and his instincts were to leave and get back to the mission. He tried to clear his head. Something was different. He needed to regain control. Maybe he had been wounded and he was paralyzed. He tried to think. These idiots had used the term X7 twice now. He looked at the combat android. Those things followed orders even if it was acting strangely. Its name must be X7, which would imply an ethereal of a more advanced design than he knew existed. but whatever, it was worth a try. X7, he said to the large machine. Tell Captain Thalia I am awake. The four looked at each other, the damn combat androids still mimicking human movements, which was starting to annoy Magnius. The tall female stepped closer to him. She had a kind face, but there were wrinkles to it. He could see when she got close, and an edge to her that suggested she understood how to be a leader. X7, are you still in there? She asked in a tone that suggested whatever the hell this X7 thing was. She had genuine feelings about its safety. You seem to be talking to me, Magnus said to her as she stared at him. She stepped back quickly, and the other three made another startled reaction, as though him just speaking surprised and confused them. The geek said, I don't think X7 is in there anymore. All four moved closer and gave the same confused and concerned look to him as the tall female had, who asked, Do you know who you are? This was infuriating. Maybe he had been injured more than he realized. He slowly began to think that maybe he had been burned or disfigured enough that he was unrecognizable. Since he could not move and was unrecognizable, he decided to try and work within these idiots' framework to get some answers. Yes, I know who I am, he answered, not yet wanting to disclose who he was until he understood this situation better. The four idiots just stared at him, presumably waiting for him to tell them. Who are you? He said instead. The tall one seemed to be in charge, and she answered him first. My name is Odessa. I am Clan Prime. This is Franklin, she said, referring to the techno-nerd. And this is Kara, she added, pointing to the small, weak female. Magnus was going to speak, but she kept going. And this is Logan, she said, referring to the retrofitted combat android. Why the hell would she give a walking metal machine a name? Magnus wondered. He decided he did not have a lot of options, so he asked, Is Logan the name of an android series or something? She smiled at him, which he thought was odd, then said, I suppose, in a way, but not the way you might think. She stepped closer to him and, in almost a motherly way, continued, We have a lot we need to cover with you. I think all of it could be a shock to your system. But we don't have time here or now. We have other matters to handle. Franklin is going to move you to the ship, then back to our base. I will have him leave you activated. You will be able to see and hear but not move. Just so you know, you are not damaged or paralyzed. We have simply deactivated the codegrams that you would use for movement. Please remain calm and open-minded, and we will make sure you are taken care of. Magnus realized he didn't have any other option. He did not want to lose the chance to gain intel and to see their ship and base, so he remained quiet. Things had certainly gotten interesting. Chapter 13. The Green Crystal. Franklin and Kara wheeled X7 out of the old tech room on the large cart, taking him back to the ship. Once they were gone, Odessa said to Logan, Well, the technology worked. X7 has certainly regained his memories. I have to be honest, I was expecting something different. It seems like instead of him gaining access to them, that somehow his personality is gone and replaced by someone else's. Logan looked down at her. There is so much we don't understand about the technology we are using. We don't really know how it works, just what it does. As long as X7 is immobile, and if this was really the final base on the planet, then even if a force is coming from off-world, we should have enough time to sort everything out. She nodded in agreement. Okay, let's finish here. What instructions did Gax give you? He said to use the green crystal to download where residual energy is sent after a transfer, Logan said, starting to walk over to the control console to follow the instructions. Odessa nodded, watching him. There was something nagging in the back of her head, but she could not place it. She was probably just nervous about Logan interacting with the old tech machine. While it was not physically the same device that they had used to transfer his spirit into the combat androids before he died, it was the same in both design and function. Logan reached the console. All he had to do was remove the crystal they had just used from the center slot and replace it with the green crystal. Wait! Odessa yelled. Logan, get away from the machine! She ran to him. What? Logan stopped, his hand halfway to removing the crystal. Logan, I just remembered. Aaron told us how the machine worked, a very basic command that he had witnessed. That's how we knew the crystal to use that would return X7's memories. But green, Logan, Green separates the spirit from the host. Not transfers, but separates. It kills the spirit and takes the life from the host. That would mean Gax gave me instructions for how to kill myself, Logan said with minimal voice inflections. He was not shocked, just disappointed. Odessa looked around the room. The old tech machinery looked so menacing. There was a saying in Machi that nothing good ever came from old tech. Many people had spent their lives, and lost their lives, dabbling in it, trying to use and understand it. She was disappointed too. Logan, let's just get back to the ship and destroy this place. If nothing else, today will be the day we rid Alethea of old tech. He nodded his head, and they both slowly walked off the dice and towards the room's exit. Once in the hallway, Odessa could feel the influence of the old tech fading. Logan, there is still so much to do. We need to solve the food shortage, build more housing for the additional people we saved, work to figure out what is going on now with X7, find Gax and those he works for, and stop them. And we need to figure out what to do with the thousands of people we have in the infirmary who were victims of the old tech transfers. They are eating as much food as everyone else, putting even more of a strain on our production. We also need to decide if we should contact the Mashi Council. The truth tellers are part of something, and I don't know how we can figure out what it is without help. There is sure to also be a Batorian war party heading to the planet to help Gax. I can only assume they intend to seek retribution on us for destroying the old tech here on Alethea. Worst of all, if Gax told us the truth about the first cycle being behind everything, including the Great Resolution, we could have just reignited a war we never even knew was fought. They walked in silence until they were out of the facility. The ship was parked close by, the back ramp still open. Combat androids were patrolling and keeping watch. There was smoke on the horizon from the destroyed ship. Logan stopped again and looked at Odessa. Things are tough right now, Odessa, but I want you to know something. I am proud of you. You have grown during the past several weeks. You are a better Prime than I ever was or ever was going to be. She smiled at him, looking up at the face of a combat android, but knowing it was really her brother in there. They walked onto the ship. It felt like the calm before the storm. The back hatch closed, and the ship accelerated away with the combat android formations following. Within a few micros, the facility exploded, just like all the others. X7 was taking everything in, watching. Franklin had him positioned near the back of the main cargo hold. After some time, E7 approached him. X7, I'm curious, was the process with the old tech machine enlightening? She carefully studied X7. He was not able to move and did not immediately acknowledge that he had heard her question. After a few moments, he spoke. Can you at least activate my head so I can turn it from side to side to better observe what is going on around me? E7 knew they had left X7 activated so that he could observe the surroundings as a beginning to the process of reacclimating him into the clan. She reached over and tapped a few input nodes on his front panel, and suddenly his head started moving side to side and up and down. Thank you, X7 said to her. What is your designation? E7 felt a small amount of sadness. While X7 had been a volatile and petty ethereal prime, she had grown accustomed to his leadership and personality. While petty, he always had deep, understated strategic considerations in his actions. She answered him after a moment. My designation is E7. You were my ethereal prime on a ship called Thoric. X7 continued to look around, somehow projecting a sense of frustration with the surroundings. What is it? E7 asked him. Curious to understand the difference in his thinking between now and before. I watched these clowns load the ship. It was the most inefficient thing I have seen. They completely lack initiative and organization. He turned his head back to her to look at her, a slight bend in the way he moved to observe things. Suddenly a jolt went down her cybernetic spin. She went cold. The way X7 was moving, his speech patterns, using that word, initiative, she had a flash of a long-lost memory, just the edges of it. Strange feelings of respect and devotion rushed across her processes. They touched something else too, something deep within her. She had no idea why, but she stood to attention and saluted. Good, Magnus said, now in total control of X7. That's a start. The end of Book 2. To be continued in the next book of the series, Old Tech. by D. Edward.